Akira dreamed of being reborn in another world, fighting monsters and marrying a princess, but reality offered him neither happiness nor opportunity. A terrifying monster killed him, destroying all his expectations. After his death, the system confirmed his first demise and connection to the new world. It granted him System Quest, Trophy System, and the unique skill Resurrection, which revived him. A faint voice called to him through the darkness. Akira woke in the office, gasping and checking whether his body was intact. His body and legs were normal, making him think it was a dream. Sayama called out and pointed behind him, drawing Ichijo's attention. Manager now grabbed Ichijo by the neck and scolded him for ignoring his superiors. Struggling to breathe, he called her name. Now released him and said he had suddenly passed out, asking whether he felt unwell. Akira claimed he had only dozed off, now complained about his habit of falling asleep, and he quickly agreed. The nightmare felt too real and his body seemed to remember the monster's bite, now asked whether he had been overworking. Akira said he was fine and promised to finish everything before the workday ended. Noticing the dark circles under his eyes, now showed concern, but Akira dismissed it. She reminded him that deadlines mattered but health came first. Akira felt a strange déjà vu. He felt this conversation had happened before but could not remember when. Now announced she was leaving and told everyone to finish their work. Sayama joked that he would not mind waking up in Nao's chokehold. Akira warned him he might get hit, then blamed his strange thoughts on exhaustion. On the way home, Akira saw two men and a couple arguing. The girl ended the relationship while the boyfriend begged her to stay. The scene felt familiar, making Akira fear something was wrong with his memory, though he quickly dismissed the thought. Strange thuds caught Akira's attention, as if something heavy was being dragged through the darkness. His body tensed as an enormous creature emerged. Akira realized the monster from his nightmares was real and standing before him. Unable to accept it, he tried to convince himself he was on a movie set. Panicking, he ran without direction, refusing to believe the situation was real, though he knew he might die. Fear overwhelmed him, and he desperately prayed to survive. The monster struck, sending him crashing into a wall. Burning pain spread through his body, breathing became difficult, and his legs stopped moving. Facing death, Akira regretted never experiencing love. His vision blurred as he realized he was truly dying. The system activated the Class C quest, repeated defeat by a monster, requiring him to kill a minotaur. His current count was 0. Akira found the quest absurd, knowing he had no chance of defeating the monster. Before he could protest, a voice sounded in his mind, and he returned to the office. Akira realized that losing the quest had turned back time. The system confirmed his defeat and disappeared. A new notification awarded him a bronze trophy for dying again, increasing stamina and muscular strength by 5 points each. Akira stared at the screen, unable to understand the trophy or stat increases. Now called to him with concern, Akira focused on her and quietly said her name. Seeing how pale he was, now asked if he felt sick. Akira pointed ahead and tried to explain that something strange was floating there. When Nao asked what he meant, Akira insisted that a transparent screen was in front of him. Nao asked Sayama whether he saw anything, but he noticed nothing. Akira panicked after realizing only he could see the screen. In a fit of desperation, he exclaimed that the screen was right in front of him and asked if they were farsighted. Nao sharply grabbed his arm, her frown deepening. She demanded that he change the way he spoke to his boss, stop talking nonsense, and just get to work. Confusion continued to grow in his mind. Everything happening was too strange, and he seriously began to doubt his sanity. Sitting on a bench, Akira realized the screen had vanished and concluded he had traveled back in time. Taking the same route home would likely repeat everything. He considered avoiding the monster by choosing another path, but decided returning to the office was safer. Back inside, Akira remained terrified of dying again and wondered why he had revived. The screen resembled a game interface, but he still had no answers. For now, survival was all that mattered. Akira woke to strange noises outside, surprised he had fallen asleep. It was already the next day. Relieved, he believed he had escaped death. He planned to drink coffee, but noticed the office was empty despite it being a workday. A siren sounded outside, and the building suddenly shook. Akira cautiously approached the window. Monsters were rampaging through the streets, destroying buildings. The city lay in ruins, filled with smoke and blood. Akira struggled to accept that his world was gone. He tried to convince himself it was a dream, but everything proved he was trapped in hell. Akira checked the internet for answers but found nothing. He feared the disaster had affected the entire world and wondered whether anyone else was alive. In despair, Akira shouted for someone to answer. Akira felt relief upon seeing Sayama, but it instantly turned to horror. Monsters were tearing Sayama apart and devouring him. Akira gagged from fear and disgust. He tried to call Sayama's name but could only mumble. Then one monster looked directly at him. Fear paralyzed Akira, but he knew staying meant death. He recognized the creature as a goblin, usually considered a weak monster in games. He might have been able to fight, but fear overwhelmed him. The goblin attacked, and Akira dodged the first blow. The second attack caught him, and the creature grabbed his clothes. Before Akira could react, the goblin struck him with its club. His body shook from the impact while the goblin paused. Realizing the monster was surprised he survived, Akira punched with all his strength. The blow produced a loud crunch and cracked a nearby wall. Akira realized his strength had become superhuman. He remembered the stats previously granted by the system. The goblin attacked again, and Akira struck it once more. The creature writhed in pain but continued fighting. Akira refused to lose. Grabbing the club, he delivered a crushing blow. The goblin fell dead. Akira had won. However, severe blood loss left him unable to move. The system raised him from level 1 to level 3, increased his stats, awarded a bronze trophy for his first monster kill, and granted the ability to subjugate monsters. New strength filled his body, though it was already too late. Akira lost consciousness and awoke back in the office. Now asked whether he was all right. Without answering, Akira jumped up and ran away. Climbing the stairs, he realized time had reset again. On the roof, the events finally began to make sense. The system displayed Akira's level, stats, available points, and the special skill Resurrection. Since his stats remained after death, he could keep growing stronger. Though he still lacked answers, Akira resolved to survive at any cost. Akira realized monsters would overrun the world within hours. Only he knew because he had repeatedly died and returned to the past, but he refused to give up. Knowing he could resurrect, Akira declared that he would fight to survive. Nao struck him on the head and ordered him to stop shouting in the building. Akira addressed her as manager. Nao reminded him that everyone else had already gone home. Realizing how late it was, Akira said he still had unfinished work and offered to stay behind. Concerned by his exhaustion, Nao refused, offered to finish the work herself, and ordered him home. Akira tried to object, but Nao firmly repeated her command. Unable to resist her pressure, Akira gave in, thinking how frightening she became when angry. However, returning home meant facing the Minotaur again, so he decided to check something first. Akira opened his status. His current level had reset to 1, though his overall level remained 3. His increased strength and stamina likely came from the trophy. He touched the screen to view more details, and the system responded. The passive skill Resurrection activated automatically upon death and returned him to a fixed point in the past by violating cause and effect. Akira realized this skill caused his repeated deaths and resets, though he still did not know how he had obtained it. Swiping the interface revealed that he could distribute points among vitality, muscle strength, stamina, speed, and luck. Akira understood that he could use them to improve his physical abilities before noticing another tab. The system offered skills including body reinforcement, analysis, weapon creation, disorganization, armor crafting, silent steps, magic circuit, art of sensual storytelling, mixing, and danger detection. Akira was delighted by the selection. He was particularly struck by the presence of such an unusual skill as art of sensual storytelling. Although he didn't understand its practical use, he even thought that this skill might turn out to be interesting. Pondering his choice, he realized that acquiring any of the presented skills required a minimum of 3 points. He currently only had 2. He faced an important decision: invest the available points in improving his stats or save them up and spend them on one of the skills. At that moment, his thoughts were interrupted by a sharp call. Now, noticing that he still hadn't left, loudly called his name. Akira, startled, looked up and saw the manager in front of him. Realizing he couldn't reveal his thoughts, he tried to calm down, reminding himself that the system interface was only visible to him. Now, giving him a careful look, expressed surprise that he hadn't left the building yet. Akira, trying to come up with an excuse, uncertainly said that he was just waiting for her to finish her work. Now, with some bewilderment, asked him if he was still following the company's old guiding principle. Akira, hearing this, froze for a moment, trying to remember what she was referring to. Now, noticing his confusion, explained that according to corporate policy, employees shouldn't go home before their boss. However, out of all the employees, he was the only one who continued to follow this rule. Realizing the absurdity of the situation, he remembered that such an exploitative requirement indeed existed, and mentally noted how ridiculous it seemed in reality. Now, not wanting to prolong the conversation, suggested he finally go home with her. Akira, understanding he had no choice, silently nodded and followed her. Akira reflected that for now, his main task was to safely level up and acquire skills. He recognized the need to prepare for upcoming events and understood that he had to be ready for them. Nao pointed him in the direction he should go and reminded him that his path lay in another direction. Akira nodded briefly, agreeing with her words. Suddenly, Nao called his name again, as if she wanted to add something. Akira noticed her hesitation and asked if she had remembered anything important. Nao hesitated a bit, but then admitted that it wasn't about that. She noted that worries and suffering are always present in life and expressed understanding that Akira was used to staying in the shadows. However, she assured him that if he ever had concerns, he could always turn to her for advice. She reminded him that taking care of subordinates was a manager's duty and suggested he rely on her, even just a little. Finishing her speech, she wished him good night and said goodbye until tomorrow. Akira thought about her words, but his mind returned to the future. He knew that in a few hours Nao would suffer the same fate as everyone else. However, he decided not to dwell on it. He wondered what a person like him could do. The situation with the goblin flashed before his eyes again. He wondered if his current self could save anyone. He concluded that Nao would manage on her own. He convinced himself that she would definitely be fine. Akira went to the store to buy necessary items, then returned to the office. Looking over his purchases, he let out a sigh of relief, deciding that this should be enough for now. In his bag were weapons, clothes, a helmet, food, water, a first aid kit, and a magazine. He didn't even understand why he bought it in such grim times. He looked at his palm and noted that although he had bought quite a few things, the bag felt surprisingly light. He concluded that this was because his muscular strength had increased. He decided to temporarily use the company building as a base for leveling up. He knew that a minotaur was roaming near his house, so he intended to stay away from it. He realized that the time when monsters would start appearing was fast approaching. Akira checked his phone and noticed a post that caught his attention. The author of the message expressed surprise, noting that a real goblin was in front of him. He wondered if he had been reborn in another world. Asuka, studying the situation, concluded that monsters had started appearing in various places. He was amazed that they were showing up here and there. The next post reported that a dragon had been discovered in China. Akira was shocked, realizing the situation was getting more serious. He figured that the self-defense forces would most likely be tasked with defending against such creatures. He continued scrolling through posts and saw mentions of other creatures. However, one particularly frightening message caught his attention. He realized that the time had come. Understanding the inevitability of what was happening, he told himself that his only goal now was to level up. Akira gathered everything he needed and went outside. Looking around, he noted that the city wasn't as chaotic as he had expected. He concluded that monsters hadn't appeared in this area yet. However, he was sure that these creatures were already lurking somewhere. He decided to be extremely careful. His main goal was to hunt small monsters like goblins that moved alone. As he moved, he noticed a dead person. He felt fear and an inner weakness, but immediately reminded himself that he had seen something similar before. He concluded that he just needed to get used to it, as it would now be part of his daily life. Suddenly, he heard a scream. He wondered if the sound could belong to a monster. He was very anxious, but decided he had to find out what was happening. He began to move cautiously towards the source of the sound, trying to stay alert. Ahead, he saw a group of people and several police officers trying to hold back the creature's advance. The police officers were shouting anxiously, demanding that everyone immediately take cover in buildings. They realized the situation was getting out of control. One of the officers demanded that the shooters prepare their weapons, but panic prevented them from reacting quickly. Akira watched intently and saw goblins in front of him. He noticed there were at least 4, possibly even 5. He concluded that the trapped people had no way to retreat. He wondered if he should try to save them, but decided it was too risky. He reminded himself that the police had weapons, so they might be able to handle it themselves. At that moment, a system message appeared before him. The system notified him of a new quest related to the monster that had defeated him last time. The quest condition was to defeat 100 goblins. Akira was stunned. He couldn't believe he had to complete a quest again. He remembered that his last fight with goblins ended in a draw. However, the system ruled it a defeat. Now it demanded he destroy 100 of these creatures. Akira was shocked, realizing how difficult a task this was. He exclaimed in despair that it was too much. Meanwhile, people continued to call for help. One of the officers, named Tanaka, prepared to shoot but hesitated. His comrades urged him, demanding that he shoot faster. When the shot finally rang out, everyone froze, awaiting the result. People anxiously looked at the goblin, hoping it was dead. However, the monsters turned out to be much more resilient than they had anticipated. Akira, carefully observing the fight, concluded that these creatures could even withstand bullet hits. He realized he had no chance of dealing with so many enemies unless he acted cautiously. Akira understood that his own life was more important than the fate of those around him. He tried to convince himself that the deaths of other people had nothing to do with him. However, the next moment his gaze fell upon a familiar face. He saw Nao. Her life was threatened by a goblin that had already raised its weapon against her. Without thinking, driven by a sudden impulse, Akira rushed forward to save her. Nao, in horror, uttered Akira's name, not believing her eyes. She couldn't understand how he ended up here, amidst the chaos and mortal danger. Akira, surprised by her presence, replied that he should be asking her that question. Nao, ignoring his words, insistently demanded that he immediately run away from there, not putting himself in danger. Akira, however, had no intention of following her advice. He looked at her and reminded her of the company's policy that employees shouldn't leave the building before their boss. He asked if she remembered that rule. Now, barely holding back tears, uttered his name, stunned by his words. Akira realized there was no time for hesitation. He remembered how Nao had always tried to protect him, cared for him, and supported him through tough times. Now it was his turn to return the favor and protect her. Without a moment's hesitation, he charged into battle against the goblins. The fight was fierce, but he managed to defeat all the enemies. Nao watched in astonishment. She couldn't comprehend how he had managed to deal with so many monsters in just an instant. Akira, not wanting to waste any time, yelled at Nao, urging her to run. He knew they couldn't stay there. Nao, still in shock, looked at the fallen goblins and asked if he had really defeated all of them. Akira quickly explained that he couldn't have destroyed such a large number of enemies, especially armed with only a kitchen knife. He urged her to get up immediately and prepare to flee. Nao, feeling fear and shock from the ordeal, tried to stand but realized her legs were completely numb and wouldn't obey. Akira, without thinking, scooped her up into his arms. Nao, feeling him hold her close, uttered his name in confusion, her voice trembling with emotion. Akira calmly told her to bear with it, assuring her that they needed to get back to the company building immediately as it was currently the safest place. They fled, leaving the battleground behind. When they finally reached the office, Akira breathed a sigh of relief, realizing they had escaped. Now, recovering from the horror, irritably called him an idiot, emphasizing that one wrong move could have cost him his life. Akira apologized guiltily, accepting her reproaches. Now, breathing heavily, looked at him again, then quietly added that he really was a fool. However, there was gratitude in her voice. Akira, not quite hearing her words, asked what she had just said. Now, a little embarrassed, sharply waved him off and told him to watch the road. Akira wondered if he would have enough strength to protect this person in a world plunged into madness and chaos. Chaos had spread everywhere, destroying the familiar order and forcing people to fight for survival. Nao cried out in pain, asking Akira to be more careful and gentle with his actions because it really hurt. Akira, focused on his task, tried to calm her, asking her to bear with it a little longer as the process was almost complete. A moment later, he reported with relief that he was finally finished, but immediately warned that similar wounds could be fatal in the future. He emphasized that without emergency measures, the situation could spiral out of control, leading to a tragic outcome. Nao listened carefully to his words and, looking a bit downcast, said she was well aware of the seriousness of what was happening. Akira looked at the supplies, then turned to her and pointed out that they had enough water and food, but they should use them wisely so the supplies wouldn't run out too quickly. Additionally, he added that they could find clothes, warm wool blankets, and pillows there to make their overnight stay more comfortable. Nao carefully looked around the shelter, then noted with surprise that he had indeed thoroughly prepared for such a situation. Then, something caught her eye and she frowned, leaning in to get a better look at her discovery. Akira noticed her interested gaze and, with a slight hint of worry in his voice, asked what she had found. Nao picked up a magazine, flipped through a few pages, and immediately blushed, shocked by the content. Looking up, she asked with some embarrassment if Akira had really bought it, as such an item seemed quite unexpected among the other supplies. Akira, seeing her reaction, instantly flushed with embarrassment, started to stammer and tried to justify himself, but his words got tangled and his voice trembled. Now, despite her own embarrassment, quickly assured him that there was nothing to be ashamed of and he shouldn't react that way. She tried to explain that she just didn't expect to see something like that among their things, but she didn't find anything strange about it. Akira pondered, processing the situation, but then his thoughts suddenly jumped to another topic. He remembered now, but immediately cut himself off, forcing himself to focus on the current state of affairs. To distract himself, he looked out the window and began to peer intently at what was happening outside, trying to determine if there was any danger nearby. Nao noticed his wary gaze and tensed slightly, then asked if he had managed to see anything and if those threatening creatures had appeared nearby. Akira carefully observed the situation, then confidently stated that everything was calm for now, but it was too early to relax. Then his gaze returned to the girl, and he asked what made her go to the store in the middle of the night despite the possible dangers. Now reluctantly admitted that she was just going to finish her remaining work and also buy an energy drink that would help her stay awake during her night shift. Akira sighed internally, noting in his thoughts that she was a true workaholic who even in critical conditions thought about work. Then another assumption crept into his mind, and he wondered if her work might be somehow connected to him. Now suddenly started talking about how many people had died right before her eyes, and the realization of it wouldn't leave her alone. With a tremor in her voice, she recalled how just a few hours ago life was completely normal, but then the world suddenly changed, and monsters appeared on the streets, destroying everything around them. Akira, lost in thought, admitted that he himself couldn't understand why everything had happened this way. However, he knew for sure that these creatures attacked people without hesitation, devouring them with terrifying cruelty. He noted that firearms proved ineffective against them, so relying on self-defense forces was pointless. Furthermore, he emphasized that such attacks were happening all over the world, and the situation would likely get even worse by morning. Now, hearing his words, lowered her head, pondering what she had heard, then suggested with despair in her voice that their world might indeed be coming to an end soon. Akira thought, running through possible scenarios in his head. An inner voice tormented him with questions. Would the end really come, and if so, why did he have this mysterious status that had appeared to him? However, the next moment it dawned on him that perhaps Nao also had this status, and that could mean something important. He turned to the girl, intending to ask a question, but saw that she had already fallen asleep, exhausted from the events she had experienced. Akira looked at her with a slight smile, noting that she must be incredibly worn out. Then he quietly told her that she could rest as long as she needed, as the place would remain safe until morning. In his head, he reminded himself that despite the temporary respite, he needed to become stronger and level up for continued survival. Before leaving, he firmly promised that he would definitely return alive and asked her to wait for him until he came back. Stepping outside, he felt the cold air and focused on his main task. He decided to make another attempt to level up, realizing that at the moment he could only defeat a lone goblin. However, if he was lucky enough to encounter a monster he could defeat, he wouldn't back down. Frightening sounds echoed from the city center. Screams, gunshots, and sounds of struggle resonated everywhere, making him wonder if he should head in that direction. Suddenly, he noticed strange movement in the distance. When he looked closer, he realized that huge bees were in front of him, not just killing people, but skewering them and dragging them away in an unknown direction. Akira went cold with the realization of what was happening and understood that now he needed to be especially careful, as the threat could come not only from the ground but also from the air. As he ventured further, he stumbled upon an alley where people had fallen victim to predatory plants, resembling Japanese ivy, which seemed to be capturing prey. He continued moving, hoping to encounter a monster he could fight. Soon, his gaze was drawn to a strange creature that at first appeared to be a machine, but was actually a monster hurtling directly towards him. Assessing the situation, he realized there was nowhere to hide and braced himself for the attack. He managed to dodge it at the last moment. Breathing heavily, he realized that monsters were appearing more frequently, and noon was fast approaching. Suddenly, a goblin appeared in his path, and he knew it was time to fight. Akira cursed in annoyance, noticing the enemy's appearance. An instinctive urge to flee flashed through his mind, but he immediately recognized his mistake. Giving in to habit again, he almost forgot why he came out here in the first place. If he didn't fight, his level wouldn't increase, and without that, his chances of survival would rapidly decrease. Looking over his opponent, he noted that it was alone and, apparently, unarmed. This fight was an opportunity. Gritting his teeth, he charged into the attack. The knife plunged into the creature's body. He aimed for the chest, then the throat, but even after several strikes, the goblin kept moving. The resilience of these creatures seemed utterly abnormal. The blade should have brought instant death, but the enemy continued to struggle. Realizing he needed to finish it, Akira decisively slashed at its throat, hoping this attack would finally be fatal. However, the knife met significant resistance. The goblin's skin was incredibly tough, and a standard kitchen blade was clearly not suited for such battles. In response, the goblin swung its arm, delivering a sharp blow. Akira felt a wave of pain course through his body, but he wasn't about to retreat. With fury, he plunged the knife in again, giving the creature no chance to counterattack. Finally, the goblin slumped to the ground, its last strength gone. A sense of victory washed over him. This fight had been tough, but he had managed it. The system immediately notified him of a level up. Moreover, the quest was progressing successfully. Breathing heavily, he felt exhaustion gradually setting in. Death had already claimed him twice, and even now, he couldn't say he was used to it. Suddenly, a voice rang out, weak, full of despair. Someone was calling for help. He tensed, listening intently, then took a step forward. There was indeed a person nearby. The faint sound turned into a persistent cry. The voice belonged to a girl who, barely standing, repeated the same words, desperately pleading for salvation. When he saw her condition, something tightened in his chest. Suddenly, a memory flashed in his mind. Giant bees reappeared before his eyes, carrying people away in an unknown direction. They weren't just taking them away for no reason. They weren't killing them immediately. They had a habitat. And that could only mean one thing: these people were being used as provisions. He was standing on the threshold of a goblin lair. The situation was becoming critical, and Akira knew it. Things were going very badly, and if he didn't figure out a way to escape, he'd be eaten alive. His thoughts raced, desperately searching for a way out. He needed a diversion, a way to buy himself even a little time. Without thinking, he suddenly yelled about a UFO, hoping to confuse his enemies. However, he realized a moment later that it had been a bad idea. The goblins immediately gave chase. He ran with all his might, feeling fear propel him forward. From an outsider's perspective, it looked like he was a member of a national athletics team, running at his absolute limit. He was almost there. He could have broken free. But suddenly, new goblins appeared ahead, blocking his path. This ruined all his plans. Realizing his path was cut off, he quickly decided to break through the building. The second floor seemed like a good option for escaping through a window. However, as soon as he got close, more goblins appeared there too. The circle was closing in, and there was no escape left. He was surrounded on all sides, and the situation was becoming hopeless. His thoughts were muddled, and fear paralyzed his movements. He knew he was doomed because no matter what decision he made, there were too many opponents. However, there was one small positive aspect to all of this. He possessed the ability to resurrect, meaning death wouldn't be a final sentence. But at that very moment, Nao's name surfaced in his mind. He had promised her he would return alive, which meant he couldn't afford to die, even if it seemed like a dramatic end. He had no plan of action, but he couldn't just stand there. A thought flashed through his mind. He must have at least one skill from his status. There had to be something that could help him deal with the situation. Memories flooded back suddenly. When the system offered him skill choices, analysis, body strengthening, and expertise were among them. Suddenly realizing he had accumulated points, he knew there was no time for lengthy deliberation. All he could do was bet on one option and hope for the best. It was a do-or-die moment. He chose the body strengthening skill. Concentrating all his strength into his fist, he struck. The result was astonishing. With just one blow, he managed to destroy several goblins at once. Shock and admiration washed over him. He couldn't believe how powerful this skill was. Adrenaline surged through him, and he felt almost invincible. Laughter escaped him, filled with exhilaration. It was incredible. One skill could change the situation so drastically. But the fight wasn't over yet. The goblins were still there, and retreating was pointless. He accepted the challenge, determined to fight to the very end. The system instantly reacted to his actions, bestowing upon him a new title, Sworn Enemy of Goblins. When it was all over, he realized he had broken through. He had truly managed to knock out all his opponents, leaving not a single one alive. With relief, he understood that he had succeeded. The goblins no longer instilled fear. The system announced a level up, and he saw his rank jump from 2 to 6. His stats also improved significantly. Vitality increased by 10, muscular strength by 25, and stamina by 24. However, his joy slightly diminished when he realized he had expected more. Despite killing so many creatures, his level hadn't risen as much as he thought it would, which was somewhat disappointing. The system notified him that the E-Class quest was complete. All 100 goblins had been defeated, and he received his well-deserved reward. At first, he couldn't believe the quest was finished. However, after analyzing the situation, he realized his calculations were correct. There really were an incredible number of goblins. Moreover, he was also due a trophy, but there was no time to deal with it now. He decided to check what he had received later and switched his focus to the quest completion reward. The system informed him that for the E-Class quest, he received 10 points, and as an additional reward, he got a bronze trophy. Furthermore, for completing his first quest, he was granted a privilege that gave him 2 extra points. When he saw the total, he couldn't hold back his emotions. He had 12 points. When he added that to the points he gained from leveling up, the grand total reached 16. Joy completely overwhelmed him. Now he had enough points to acquire several skills at once, which significantly increased his chances of survival. Carefully examining his new abilities, he discovered that the title Goblin's Sworn Enemy gave him a small bonus. His damage against goblins increased by 3%, providing an additional advantage in future battles. However, the title also had a downside. Hostility from goblins increased by 20%, meaning they would now hunt him even more fiercely. Akira checked his stats and realized he had 16 points at his disposal. He could distribute them among various abilities, but he wanted to choose something truly useful. The skill for crafting weapons and armor sounded good, but disorganization and using monster materials seemed more necessary. However, such skills required a lot of time and were likely quite expensive. For safety, it would be useful to be able to detect danger in advance and scout out enemies, but skills had levels, so he could develop them gradually. While contemplating, Akira clicked on Body Reinforcement. The system immediately displayed information: Body Reinforcement Level 2, a passive skill that increases muscular strength, stamina, and speed. The effect depends on the skill level. 20 points were required to upgrade the skill. Seeing this, he immediately realized he was right in his assumptions. The second level of Body Reinforcement existed but required too many resources. 20 points were an unbearable price at the moment. Unable to take out a loan or anything similar, he wondered where to get the missing 4 points. Could he handle new challenges if even the previous fights were difficult for him? However, he couldn't postpone the choice, and he made a final decision. The system confirmed the acquisition of the analysis skill. Now it was impossible to gain additional experience points from goblins as their numbers were already depleted. However, the new skill allowed him to assess opponents' strength and fight more strategically, reducing risk. He decided to save the remaining points for future body reinforcement upgrades. Deciding to test his new skill, he activated analysis. Information appeared before his eyes: Goblin Level 3, Vitality 12, Muscular Strength 10, Stamina 10, Speed 5, Magic Power 2, Luck 1. Information about the individual and its skills was not displayed due to insufficient analysis level. Reading the data, Akira realized that the goblin's vitality was almost on par with his own. This discovery explained why they were so resilient. It was already starting to get light outside. A worrying thought about Nao flashed through his mind. Too much time had passed and he didn't know what had happened to her. His thoughts were interrupted when he encountered 2 gray wolves. The system instantly provided information: Gray Wolf, Level 13, Vitality 18, Muscular Strength 30, Stamina 30, Speed 50, Magic Power 15, Luck 10. Seeing this data, he instantly realized that the wolves' stats were much higher than his own. He began to doubt if he could handle fighting them. However, to his surprise, the wolves ran away without even attempting to attack. This behavior puzzled him. The only explanation that came to mind was that he now exuded such power that even animals sensed the threat. However, there was no time to relax. A strange silence hung in the air, broken only by his own footsteps. There were no gunshots, no screams, not even any signs of monsters. Gradually, a bad feeling crept in. A moment later, he heard distant sounds. When he looked towards the source of the noise, his breath caught. A minotaur stood before him. The thought immediately flashed through his mind that this creature was responsible for the change in the city's atmosphere. He was still at a decent distance, and there was still a chance to run. His body tensed in indecision. However, he couldn't just leave things as they were. He had a chance to win. Activating his analysis skill, he quickly gathered data. Boss Minotaur Level 45, Vitality 112, muscular strength 190, stamina 78, speed 110, magic power 40, luck 44. The difference was catastrophic. The Minotaur's strength surpassed his own by several times. The number of goblins he had defeated earlier was nothing compared to this creature. The realization of his own powerlessness pierced his mind. In its eyes, he was nothing more than prey. The Minotaur didn't hesitate and charged into attack. It rushed towards him with terrifying speed. The blow was devastating. Akira didn't manage to dodge, and the monster's attack sent him flying a great distance. A sharp, tearing pain shot through his body, making every cell shudder with unbearable sensations. The enemy's blow threw him back, and his muscles seemed to refuse to obey. His thoughts were muddled, his breathing was ragged, and his limbs felt heavy. It was impossible to even imagine how he could deal with such an opponent when the difference in strength seemed insurmountable. His brain frantically tried to find a way out, but the answer was obvious. The only option was to flee, as continuing the fight meant certain death. His consciousness wavered between fear and despair, but one thought cut through everything else. He needed to get back to Nao urgently, while there was still some possibility of doing so. As soon as this idea formed in his head, an alarming signal pierced the system. The global reversal coefficient had exceeded 1%, causing the monster to partially regain its original strength. The phrase sounded like a death sentence, making him forget about the pain and fatigue for a second. His brain desperately tried to grasp the meaning of what was said, but understanding wouldn't come. The global reversal coefficient had suddenly become a key factor in what was happening. The enemy regaining its original strength meant the situation had only worsened. The system provided no answers to these questions, leaving him in terrifying uncertainty. However, there was no time to ponder because the Minotaur reappeared right in front of him. Only a moment passed, but the distance between them vanished as if it had never existed. Events unfolded with terrifying speed, leaving no time to react. The understanding of what was happening came too late. Akira's inner voice exploded in a panicked scream, but it was no longer possible to change anything. The system instantly displayed updated data, mercilessly confirming his worst fears. The boss Minotaur had now reached level 80. Its vitality had increased to 273. Muscular strength had risen to 375, making its blows even more destructive. Stamina had climbed to 213, and speed now reached 192. Magic power and luck had also significantly increased, making the creature practically invincible. The monster had become even more powerful than before, leaving virtually zero chances of survival. All its stats had increased several times over, making the difference in strength even more absurd. Any attempt to resist was pointless because defeating the opponent was impossible. The system coldly registered his fourth death, confirming that this battle was his last. Akira turned his attention to Nao, uttering her name in surprise. He decisively stepped forward and hugged her tightly, feeling the warmth of her body. Nao, suddenly finding herself in his embrace, cried out his name with astonishment and some confusion, clearly not expecting such a thing. Akira, hearing her voice, froze, his face expressing genuine bewilderment, as he had not expected to see Nao here. Nao, quickly recovering from the shock, hit him hard, not holding back her irritation, clearly angered by what he had done. Without hiding her indignation, she loudly expressed her displeasure, calling him a fool and scolding him for even daring to do such a thing. Her voice sounded strained as she continued to speak, pointing out that if someone had seen them at that moment, the situation could have become extremely awkward and even dangerous. After that, she let out a heavy sigh as if trying to compose herself and decided not to continue the argument. She suggested they drop the topic and move on to something else. Akira stood motionless, a terrifying truth suddenly dawning on him, making him shudder internally. He realized he had been killed in the past, and now he was facing that nightmare once again. Mentally, he cursed himself for letting this happen, realizing he was once again in a seemingly inescapable situation. A crushing sense of helplessness washed over him as he understood that even at level 45, this monster was too strong to defeat. Then he remembered something even more horrifying. That same monster had somehow reached level 80, becoming even more invincible. Akira couldn't figure out how it had gotten stronger, and the question gnawed at him. This realization became clearer as he recalled the system had registered a 1% increase in this coefficient. If he wasn't mistaken, it had happened sometime after noon. The more he thought about it, the more he came to a frightening conclusion. Monsters were indeed getting stronger over time, and this process was irreversible. Realizing he had no chance of defeating them, he came to a definitive conclusion. He had to escape. Resistance was futile, and the only option was to flee, which might offer him a slim hope of survival. Akira turned to the driver and firmly stated the name of the city he intended to go to, Kanagawa. The driver briefly acknowledged, confirming he understood the instruction, and the car started moving. Akira sat lost in thought, contemplating that he needed to get as far away from this cursed city as possible. His first priority was to ensure his safety, to find a secure place where he could hide from the threat. The driver, unexpectedly breaking the silence, noticed something strange that caught his attention. The system instantly activated and registered the creature's parameters, identifying it as a level 12 monster. Its stats were as follows: vitality was 30, muscle strength was 40, stamina was 30, speed was 30, magic power was 2, and luck was 10. Akira suddenly felt a strange unease, realizing that monsters had already started appearing right in the city. A bad premonition crept into his soul, making him tense up. The driver, as if gripped by panic, suddenly exclaimed, his voice sounding frightened and strained. The system immediately reacted to the new threat, instantly identifying a level 37 orc monster before them. Its parameters were significantly higher than the boar's and looked menacing. Vitality reached 93, muscle strength was 105, stamina was 123, speed was 104, magic power was 30, and luck was 30. Akira instantly realized the situation was out of control and loudly ordered the driver to hit the gas immediately. His voice broke into a shout. He demanded they speed up as fast as possible. But it was all in vain. The enormous orc delivered one devastating blow. However, the next moment he found himself back in the office, as if time had rewound. Without wasting any time, he boarded a train, hoping it would help him escape. But soon, frightened shouts from the passengers erupted. The system registered the appearance of a new monster, a level 70 giant boss. Akira found himself back in the past again, realizing there was no escape for him. Death became inevitable, but each time after it, he would be resurrected again. This nightmare never ended, repeating over and over. He painfully realized that his resurrection was not a gift, but an endless curse that gave him no chance for peace. There was no end to it, and this entire endless cycle was a living hell. The sound of a voice pulled him out of his dark thoughts. Now called out to him, her voice filled with concern as she tried to make sure he was okay. Akira, without looking up, gave her a muffled reply. He simply stated that he was leaving, without specifying where he was going. But a new idea was already forming in his mind, one he hadn't considered before. He suddenly realized there was one obvious solution he hadn't tried yet. If he took his own life, perhaps this endless hell would finally end. The more he thought about it, the more logical this solution seemed. He was sure it had to work. Without wasting any time, he went up to the roof of a tall building. Standing right at the edge, he looked down indifferently. His lips trembled as he whispered a short prayer. He begged the Lord to grant him the ability to die. But before he could take a step forward, a scream echoed behind him. A voice full of anger and terror pierced the silence. Now, with wide eyes, rushed towards him, loudly demanding an explanation. She wanted to know what the hell he was doing. Akira flinched in surprise, not expecting to see her there. He stammered her name, barely believing his eyes. Akira tried to understand why she was there. Now didn't give him time to think. Her voice was firm and brooked no argument as she told him to come closer. She gave him no choice, insisting that he immediately step away from the edge. Akira was still in a slight shock, but his instincts made him ask a question. He asked if she was okay. Now looked away, taking a deep breath. She quietly admitted that it wasn't about being afraid of heights at all. Now said she just never liked them, but that wasn't the main thing. Then she added that following him was the right decision. Akira lowered his head at a loss for words, but he still tried to justify himself. He quietly said that he just went up to the roof to get some fresh air, now changed the subject, trying to distract him. She asked if he had any plans for the near future. After a short pause, she added that they hadn't gone out for a drink together in a long time. Finally, she casually threw in that it was the boss's order. Later, Nao asked for 2 large glasses of beer. After that, she turned to Akira and told him not to be shy, but to drink as much as he could. Akira, hearing her words, replied that he wasn't in the mood to drink at all. He added that he considered it a completely meaningless activity. Now, looking at him intently, said that only in that case would he have a choice to go home, jump out the window, or do something else that might come to his mind. She emphasized that if he emptied his mug faster than her, they would have to make a deal. Akira, after a moment's thought, agreed. Now raised her glass and suggested they drink it all down. Akira, watching her, mentally noted how fast this girl was. Now, with a slight smile, remarked that it had been a long time since they had a chance to talk calmly. She recalled that they used to chat often on the way home after school clubs. Then, giggling, she decided to remind him of the time he lost an application during his first days at work. She noted that back then he acted as if something terrible had happened and his frightened face looked funny. Akira, a little embarrassed, admitted that everything was indeed exactly as she said. He tried to say something else, but now, looking intently at him, unexpectedly added that even now his face showed the same frightened expression. She asked with slight concern what had happened to him, now confessed that she was worried about him not only as his boss but also as a person. Akira sighed, then, looking away, said that if he told her the world would be destroyed by monsters within the next few hours, would she believe him? Now frowned, surprised by his words, and asked if he had any proof. Akira confirmed that proof did indeed exist. He informed her that in a few minutes, live images from a website would appear, showing a dragon discovered in China. Now, hearing this, was first taken aback, then repeated his words, clarifying if he was really talking about a dragon. She nervously added that perhaps he was referring to the very incident that people had already started talking about. Her voice was filled with confusion as she demanded an explanation of how he knew about it. She suggested that he might be a psychic. Akira calmly replied that it wasn't quite like that. He noted that while her guess was correct in a sense, he was actually just forced to relive his life in this world again and again. He confessed that the cause of everything happening was a special skill. Now, hearing this, frowned slightly and asked what he meant by a skill. Akira suggested they conduct a small experiment. He asked her to say the word status. Now, still confused, repeated the word. A moment later, her eyes widened in surprise at what had happened. She stated in shock that some strange information had appeared before her eyes and expressed doubt, wondering if it was a hallucination. Now added that she hadn't had enough to drink yet to start having visions. Akira firmly stated that it was not a hallucination at all. He explained that what she saw was her own status, which only she could see. Akira added that thanks to the unique properties of his own status, he possessed a skill that allowed him to resurrect endlessly. Then he asked if she believed him now. Nao was silent for a while, processing what he had said. Finally, she nodded, saying that she now understood why he was so down. Nao added that his so-called resurrection skill seemed to be the cause of his suffering. Akira confirmed that was exactly how things were. Nao, after a short pause, asked how many times he had already gone through this. Akira calmly replied that he had lived this day 15 times so far. Now quietly exhaled, stunned by his words. She remarked that it was indeed too many times. After that, Nao cautiously asked what had happened to people when the monsters started appearing in this world. Akira admitted that he couldn't answer that question precisely. However, he noted that, at the very least, the residents of this city inevitably died at the hands of a monster known as a minotaur. Furthermore, he added that he himself had never lived past noon on this day. Nao became wary and asked why noon was his fatal moment. Akira explained that after that time, all the monsters that appeared in the world began to receive a power-up. He clarified that regardless of whether a person hid from the monster's sight or not, the empowered minotaur invariably found its victim and killed them. Akira added that after such a death, he inevitably returned to the past and was forced to relive this day again. He confessed that no matter how many times he tried, he couldn't truly die, and this nightmare continued again and again. In a weak voice, he said that he no longer knew what to do. Akira admitted that no matter how high a level or skill he obtained, everything became meaningless due to the endless monster power-ups. He desperately said that he couldn't escape this hell and saw no point in talking to anyone about it. Akira tiredly asked her to just leave him alone. Nao narrowed her eyes, looked at him intently, and then unexpectedly told him to sit back down immediately. She firmly stated that their conversation was not over yet. Akira looked at her in surprise, then thought to himself that she seemed to have had too much to drink. He was amazed that even despite their serious conversation, the alcohol was starting to affect her. Nao slowly shook her head, a hint of irritation in her voice, and called him a complete idiot. Then, stumbling over her words, she asked if he had ever tried something specific. Akira was confused and asked what exactly she was talking about. Despite her obvious intoxication, Nao firmly stated that he should have tried to defeat the Minotaur before it got its power up. Akira, suddenly realizing he hadn't even considered that option, was a little flustered. He quietly admitted that he had never tried to do that. Nao unexpectedly exclaimed, expressing extreme displeasure. Her voice trembled with indignation as she demanded an explanation for why he hadn't even tried to defeat the Minotaur. Akira took a deep breath and replied with a grim expression. He confessed that he simply saw no hope for the future, even if he managed to defeat the Minotaur. Weariness was evident in his voice as he explained that the neighboring village was already overrun with orcs. Akira then added that a giant monster was wreaking havoc in another nearby town, and even if he dealt with one threat, everything would inevitably repeat itself. Hearing these words, now tense, then angrily clenched her fists. She sharply raised her voice, accusing him of giving up so easily. Irritation and despair were in her words as she said she wouldn't let him throw in the towel so easily. She firmly declared that she would beat all that defeatist attitude out of him. However, the words caught in her throat, and she repeated the same thing several times as if she couldn't find the right words. Akira slowly shook his head and with weariness in his voice asked her to stop. He quietly said that he no longer had the strength to fight. His voice sounded dejected as he confessed that the only thing he wanted was to just die right now. Akira admitted that he didn't want to live in a world where he had to exist alone, surrounded by monsters and endless deaths. Now suddenly burst into tears, her shoulders trembling with emotion. She tried her best to hold back her sobs, but her voice was still filled with pain as she asked him not to talk like that anymore. Through her tears, she struggled to say that he wasn't alone. Now firmly added that it didn't matter what world or what time they were in, she would always be by his side. Akira lowered his head, his face contorted in an internal struggle. He exhaled and barely audibly whispered that he had still left her to die. Now quickly wiped away her tears and spoke with renewed determination. She firmly told him not to worry about her. Now then added that if they could laugh and drink together again in the end, that would be enough for her. She confessed that no matter how hard things got, she would still support him. After that, she sternly told him not to talk about death in front of her anymore. Her voice trembled, but it conveyed genuine concern. At the end of her speech, she called him an idiot, but there was no anger in her words, only pain and worry. Akira suddenly froze, realizing something important. He mentally chastised himself for repeatedly forgetting one important thing all this time, despite countless deaths. He remembered his previous decision. He had sworn to protect this girl, but instead he had succumbed to despair again. Now, noticing his confusion, frowned at him. Then she repeated that he shouldn't say things like, "I want to die." Akira flinched at her voice. He looked at her and realized with astonishment that she was still crying. He tried to say something but was at a loss for words. Now wiped her tears with the back of her hand and mumbled that she had been acting too ugly. Akira chuckled, looking at her. He gently told her not to be so upset and asked if she needed water to sober up a bit. Now nodded, admitting that she really did need water. Akira, barely suppressing a laugh, pointed at her face and remarked that she had snot running down it. Now sighed heavily and quietly mumbled that she looked ugly again. Akira, no longer holding back, burst out laughing. With a genuine smile, he remarked that she was ridiculously candid. Now huffed indignantly, stating that the comment about her being silly was unnecessary. Then she sharply added that he should be more serious. Akira suddenly stopped laughing and slowly straightened up. Determination appeared in his eyes as he firmly declared that he would fight the Minotaur. Now, hearing this, stated that she would go with him. Akira shook his head, firmly stating that until he could defeat the Minotaur alone, he couldn't put her in danger. His voice was calm but resolute as he wondered how many more times he'd have to live through this life before achieving victory. Now remained silent for a moment, then sighed and slowly said that in that case, her true self would part ways with him. Akira felt his heart clench, but he still managed to nod. Trying to stay composed, he looked her in the eyes and promised firmly that one day, though he didn't know when, he would definitely save her. Now smiled softly, looked at him and nodded. She simply said she would wait. Later, Akira looked away, a single thought racing through his mind. This city, sooner or later, would inevitably be destroyed by the Minotaur. If he didn't find a way to prevent this future, both he and Nao would perish. But now he had made a vow to himself that he would no longer run away. He was determined to defeat the Minotaur, no matter the cost. Akira realized his current level was too low to fight the Minotaur, making any attempt to engage it pointless. He concluded that he needed to level up before he could even consider a confrontation with such an opponent. The system displayed his current stats, showing he was at level 8. His vitality was 15, muscle strength reached 30, stamina was 24, speed was 19, and luck was 9. He had 13 unspent points to allocate as he wished. In addition, he possessed the special skill of resurrection, as well as body strengthening and analysis abilities. A racial bonus from goblins gave him an additional 3% damage increase. Akira reflected on his recent achievements, realizing that by using 10 bronze trophies, he had managed to increase his vitality by 5 points. However, goblins could no longer serve as a means for him to level up as they no longer provided him with enough experience. He needed to find a new opponent with a level closer to his own. He assumed there must be a suitable monster in the area and decided to go looking for it. Suddenly, a trash can rolled in front of him, putting him on alert. He immediately wondered what could have caused it to move. He considered several possibilities, including a potential encounter with a monster or a goblin. The thought even crossed his mind that he should perhaps eliminate the source of the suspicious movement immediately, just in case. However, when he looked closer, he discovered that it wasn't a monster inside, but a little girl. She unexpectedly rushed towards him, pleading for help. Akira didn't immediately understand what was happening, but after a brief conversation, he learned that the girl was looking for her younger sister. She explained that they were heading to a shelter with their mothers, but she lost her sister along the way and decided to go back to find her. However, a monster appeared, forcing her to hide. Akira was surprised that she chose a trash can as a hiding spot. He couldn't help but notice the strangeness of the situation. After understanding the details, he noticed that the girl was clinging to him too tightly, making it difficult to move. The frightened girl began to apologize, admitting that she was so scared she couldn't even control her physiological reactions. Akira sharply retorted, stating that he was only 25 and couldn't be called uncle. Then, a crow flying by caught his attention, and he tried to calm the girl, urging her to release her grip as he wouldn't be able to act effectively in case of sudden danger. Although he tried to understand what was happening, his thoughts were focused elsewhere. He knew that his primary goal was to level up, and any delays like this only distracted him from his main objective. Despite this, he decided to find out why the girl had gone looking for her sister, despite the intense fear she was experiencing. She confessed that thinking about her younger sister crying alone, she couldn't just stand by and do nothing. For this reason, she felt compelled to find her sister, no matter what, even despite her fear. Suddenly, Akira noticed something suspicious ahead. He drew the girl's attention to the danger, pointing out a man-eating plant whose tongues posed a deadly threat. Akira explained that if they stepped on these tendrils, they would immediately wrap around the victim's body and drag them inside. However, he also noted that if they didn't touch them, they could pass by without consequences. He told the girl to pull herself together and carefully approach him. Scared, she confessed that her legs were numb and she couldn't move. Akira tried to cheer her up and urged her to pull herself together. Suddenly, the girl lost her balance, but he managed to catch her before she fell. She sincerely thanked him for his help, and he realized this path would be much harder than he'd anticipated. Suddenly, the girl shrieked in fear. Akira, on alert, looked at the source of her anxiety. The girl pointed to a backpack that belonged to her sister, Mai. A moment later, they spotted Mai herself, already completely entangled by a man-eating plant. The system immediately analyzed the monster and provided its characteristics. The creature was level 9 and had 15 vitality, 22 muscle strength, 20 stamina, 17 speed, 8 magic power, and 3 luck. The girl, consumed by panic, loudly screamed her sister's name. Akira demanded that she immediately step back, as her life would be in serious danger if she got within the monster's reach. Despite this, she refused to leave, desperately begging him to help her sister. Realizing there was no time for hesitation, he told her not to move and immediately attacked the monster. However, the plant was stronger than he expected, and a powerful blow sent him flying straight into a wall. Akira realized that the goblin expedition alone wasn't enough. If he continued at this pace, everyone around them would be doomed. Unexpectedly, the girl rushed forward, letting out a loud battle cry. Akira was shocked by her recklessness, as the monster could destroy her in an instant. But she, overcoming her own fear, tried to calm her sister, assuring her that she would definitely save her. Mai's strength was rapidly fading, but she still managed to quietly utter her sister's name. Akira used this moment and struck the plant again. The system informed him that his level had increased from 8 to 9. He realized he had only managed to win because the monster's attention was diverted by other people. At that moment, he considered for the first time that saving others wasn't such a useless thing after all. The girl thanked him, sincerely apologizing and promising that she would never forget his kindness. Akira tried to explain that he hadn't done anything special, but he didn't get to finish. Before his eyes, both girls were killed. He was stunned, unable to comprehend what was happening. The system immediately reported data on the new opponent. The man-eater was level 22 with 45 vitality, 70 muscle strength, 20 stamina, 18 speed, 16 magic power, and 8 luck. Akira knew that fighting the man-eater was pointless, as the level difference between them was too great. He realized that the only option in this situation was to flee. However, despite the logic of this decision, he suddenly found himself unable to move. His mind screamed at him to run, but his body wouldn't obey. A growing realization within him told him he couldn't just turn his back on the opponent. He didn't know who he was in that moment, but escape seemed impossible. The monster launched an attack, directing all its power at Akira. Akira felt how heavy and fast the blow was. He knew that if the man-eater hit him squarely, he would die. However, he also noticed that the monster had weak defenses. Despite the significant level difference, he didn't lose his composure. A conviction grew within him that he could achieve victory. Suddenly, however, his dagger broke. Akira realized that if the ogre could wipe out an entire goblin expedition, he had to be able to destroy it in return. Gathering all his strength, he delivered a powerful punch. For a moment, he thought the attack had succeeded. However, an instant later, he noticed the monster's regeneration activate. This realization caught him off guard. He tried to dodge but wasn't fast enough. The ogre retaliated, sending Akira flying. Feeling pain throughout his body, he understood just how cruel this world was. Yet, it was precisely this cruelty that gave him the strength not to give up. Mustering his remaining strength, he lifted a fuel truck and hurled it at the monster. A powerful explosion erupted, illuminating the area with bright flames. Akira noticed that after this attack, the ogre visibly shrank. This time, its regeneration didn't activate. He realized that even plant monsters were vulnerable to fire, and this was a pattern he could exploit. The system notified him that his level had increased from 9 to 15. However, despite this significant growth, he knew he was still too weak. He felt helpless because he couldn't protect those he cared about. Wanting to become stronger, he called up his status menu. The system displayed the changes. His body reinforcement skill had reached level 2. This passive skill now provided an enhancement to muscle strength, stamina, and speed, with the magnitude of the boost depending on the skill level. The system offered to spend 20 acquired points to raise the skill's level. Akira confirmed the upgrade, thereby acquiring body reinforcement level 2. Feeling new power within him, he made a final decision. He swore he would try to change this corrupted and cruel world. The system updated his stats. Vitality increased to 22, muscle strength rose to 37, stamina reached 31, speed increased to 26, and luck grew to 16. Akira sensed the moment approaching. He stood waiting when the monster suddenly attacked him. Gathering all his strength, he delivered a single blow that instantly annihilated the enemy. He realized that if he waited for medium-sized monsters at the right moment, he could easily defeat them by exploiting favorable tactical opportunities. The system notified him of a level up. He had finally achieved it after much effort. During this period, he had died 3 times already, but he kept pushing forward. His overall level reached 25, and 10 accumulated points were waiting to be distributed. However, this wasn't enough to raise his body strengthening level. He knew that once he reached the 3rd level of body strengthening, he would be able to defeat the Minotaur. The system updated his stats. His vitality was now 32, muscular strength increased to 77, stamina rose to 71, speed reached 66, and luck increased to 26. In addition to the 3% goblin racial bonus, he now had similar enhancements against wolf packs and plant-type monsters. Akira pondered that after reaching level 20, leveling up became much slower. Although he managed to gain only 1 level, it took him over 10 hours. He knew that the fastest way to earn points remained quest rewards. However, the main quest directly required him to defeat the Minotaur. He didn't understand why, after clearing out the goblins, no more quests related to small monsters appeared. There were no creatures left in the city that could pose a worthy opponent, except for the Minotaur. He began to wonder if there were any other useful skills that could accelerate his development. His gaze fell on one of them, and a thought sparked in his mind. The system displayed a skill called Magic Circuit. It required 5 points to acquire. This was a passive skill that allowed living beings, initially incapable of magic, to master it. Magical abilities were determined by the number of magic circuits created in the body, and their effectiveness depended on the skill level. Akira felt that this was exactly what he had been thinking about. The system confirmed the skill acquisition, and he immediately noticed a change in his status. He now had magical power. He concluded that if he could raise this skill and combine it with another suitable ability, he could match the Minotaur even at level 30. He still had 5 more levels to overcome, and he was ready to move forward. The process continued. The system registered several deaths, 19th, 21st, 23rd. However, he earned a bronze trophy and the title of Hunter from these battles. He felt that he was almost there, close to achieving his goal. Giving up was not an option for him. He was determined to defeat the Minotaur and save Nao. The system announced his level up from 29 to 30. Akira returned to the past. Nao stood before him, looking at him with surprise. She couldn't believe he had ignored their boss so much. However, when Nao looked at him more closely, she was astonished. She couldn't understand when he had become so strong. Akira looked at her with gratitude. He confessed that it was only thanks to her words that he had been able to hold on until this moment. All this time, he had resisted without taking a single step back, and now he wanted to express his sincere thanks. Nao didn't understand why he was suddenly saying such things. He asked her not to leave her job, even if chaos erupted outside the building. It was important to him that she stay put until everything was over. She wanted to know what he was talking about, but he didn't explain. He only said it was time for him to go. Nao tried to stop him, but he had already made his choice. The system updated his stats. His vitality was now 37, muscular strength reached 82, stamina increased to 76, speed rose to 71, magical power reached 6, and luck increased to 31. In addition to his existing bonuses, another one was added. He now dealt extra damage to beast-type monsters. Akira assessed his situation. He had no weapon, and the only possible way to fight was hand-to-hand combat. He decided to acquire one more skill before heading into the decisive battle. Walking past the street, he observed familiar scenes. Two men complained that they shouldn't have drunk so much. A couple was arguing, and the girl declared that she couldn't take it anymore and was breaking up. The guy tried to stop her, assuring her that he loved her more than anyone. Akira watched this and remembered. It all started right here. The system registered a new quest to fight the monster that had once killed him. It was a Class C quest, and the condition was to destroy the Minotaur. Akira felt the familiar, terrifying atmosphere. He knew he had come for revenge. His hands and feet trembled. Memories of pain and fear flooded back with renewed intensity. Despite all this, he had no other choice. He began his attack. Now he understood the Minotaur's attack patterns. Gathering all his strength, he landed the first punch. This was just the beginning. A fierce battle had begun. Nao looked out the window, trying to figure out what exactly was happening outside. Her gaze lingered on the street, where something unusual was clearly unfolding, making her wonder about the possible reasons for it. At that moment, Akira's words resurfaced in her memory. He had strongly advised her not to leave her workplace, even if something strange or dangerous started outside. He warned her against any impulsive actions, making it clear that the consequences could be serious. Reflecting on this, Nao couldn't shake the unsettling thought that something had happened to Akira. Her anxiety grew, and her mind raced with possible explanations for his words and what was now happening outside the window. Meanwhile, Akira himself was engaged in a brutal and exhausting battle against the Minotaur, locked in a deadly confrontation. His body was already feeling the effects of numerous attacks, but the fight continued. In the midst of the struggle, he realized he had managed to decipher the enemy's attack patterns, successfully predicting its movements. However, even with this knowledge, he couldn't completely dodge the next blow. The Minotaur's powerful attack struck Akira, knocking him off his feet and sending him flying. The force of the blow was so immense that even a slight touch from the enemy felt like a destructive wave. Analyzing his own and the Minotaur's stats, Akira understood that the Minotaur's muscle strength reached 190, while his own stamina was only 76. This meant that if the monster landed a truly serious blow, he wouldn't survive. Akira came to the inevitable conclusion that his strength was at its limit. His only chance to survive this fight was to use a special skill that could give him some advantage. At that moment, the system activated the skill, announcing that the sprint ability had been used. Its duration was exactly 60 seconds, and this interval would decide the outcome of the battle. With the ability activated, Akira managed to dodge another enemy attack despite its overwhelming power. The speed with which he moved allowed him to minimize damage and maintain balance during the fight. Realizing that the Minotaur had too much momentum in its attacks, he focused on optimally using the skill. He knew that the key to survival lay in minimal movement that could reduce the force of the blow. Directing all his concentration into one precise moment, Akira delivered a swift strike directly to the enemy's body, counting on the element of surprise. Receiving an unexpected result from the strike, he concluded that sprint not only increased his speed but also made his movements significantly more effective. This led him to deduce that the skill provided not only acceleration but also the potential to enhance attacks. He realized that the magical power acquired through the magic circuit ability was now playing a key role in the battle, as sprint used it as a resource. Despite this, he understood that the 60-second limit imposed strict constraints, forcing him to finish the fight before the skill expired. Prolonging the battle was an unaffordable luxury. The system described the skill's properties in detail, confirming that it consumed the user's magical power, increasing speed for 1 minute. The magnitude of the acceleration directly depended on the ability's level and the amount of magic in the status after activation. Akira kept striking, but even after so many attacks, he noticed they weren't having a decisive effect. His strength was slowly draining, and the ability's duration was rapidly coming to an end. Realizing that he wouldn't stand a chance after Sprint wore off, he forced himself to find another way to finish the fight. Suddenly, an idea flashed in his mind that could be the decisive factor. He thought that despite the enemy's incredible toughness, even it must have a weakness. The guy concluded that the Minotaur's durability was immense, but he didn't know if it could withstand a collision with a metal frame. This could be his last chance to win. Gathering all his remaining strength, he put all his power into one final, most potent strike, aiming to end the battle. The attack hit its mark, and the result was exactly what he had hoped for. The crushing blow impaled the Minotaur's body on the metal frame, rendering it unable to continue fighting. Akira, feeling the tension gradually subside, realized the plan had worked and the fight was over. He exhaled with difficulty, understanding that he had finally managed to defeat the enemy. Exhaustion washed over him, but the joy of victory overshadowed his fatigue. He noted to himself that he had finished the fight with great difficulty, but he had still succeeded. Trying to regain his strength, he decided to rest for a bit, after which he planned to return to Nao. However, the strange absence of a system notification about the quest's completion made him uneasy. Before he could process the situation, the Minotaur suddenly rose, showing that all his attacks had been insufficient for a final defeat. A realization flashed in his mind that things were going terribly wrong and something dreadful was approaching. At that moment, the system notified him of the repeated use of the sprint skill, indicating that this time the remaining duration was 42.87 seconds. The Minotaur's thunderous roar ripped through the air, shaking everything around and chilling everyone nearby to the bone. The city residents, hearing this roar, began to whisper anxiously among themselves, gripped by panic. They wondered what it was and discussed terrifying conjectures with shivers. Suddenly, something fell from the sky to the ground at incredible speed, causing panic among eyewitnesses. The frightened people tried to understand what had happened, examining the deep crater that had appeared on the ground. The first assumption was that a terrorist act had occurred, and many fell into horror, realizing the potential threat. However, upon closer inspection, some noticed that the fallen object was a person. A commotion arose among the gathered crowd. Some called for an ambulance, while others tried to see if the fallen person was alive. A dazed Akira tried to comprehend what had happened to him. A panicked thought flashed through his mind. Was he even alive? He had almost lost all sensation in his body and realized he couldn't move. Reflecting on what had happened, he belatedly understood that he had used sprint, yet he was in such a state. A woman appeared before him, bending down to check on him. Struggling to gather his thoughts, he could only manage a short warning command, telling her to run. Before she could react, the Minotaur reappeared right in front of them, announcing its presence with a terrifying silhouette. The residents, seeing the monster, were bewildered, not believing their eyes. Confused shouts erupted from all sides. People frantically tried to comprehend what was happening, experiencing both fear and excitement. The sudden appearance of the giant creature caused not only terror but also genuine curiosity. Some didn't even immediately grasp the extent of the threat. A moment later, the Minotaur mercilessly killed the woman who was next to Akira, making everyone around recoil in horror. The frightened residents began to scatter in a panic. Some screamed, some called the police, and some froze in shock. The arriving police officers immediately opened fire, hoping to stop the monster, but their attacks had no desired effect. Akira watched everything unfold, coming to the bitter realization that his defeat was inevitable. Thoughts raced through his mind, telling him it was impossible to overcome this opponent. He remembered how he always failed in crucial moments in his school club, at work, in love. A bitter understanding of his own helplessness consumed him, knowing that people were dying because of him. Panic and despair overwhelmed him. The realization that he couldn't protect anyone tore him apart from the inside. The Minotaur approached him, roaring with terrifying force, ready to deliver the decisive blow. Suddenly, a loud voice rang out, drawing the monster's attention. Nao entered the fray, bravely challenging the dangerous creature. Seeing her, Akira struggled to utter her name, unable to believe his eyes. Despite her fear, the girl declared that she was now his opponent. He realized she had acted against his warnings, breaking her earlier promise to stay safe. Despair gripped him even harder as he knew she was now doomed too. Gathering all his strength, he tried to warn her, begging her to run immediately while there was still a chance. However, Nao confidently replied that she wasn't going to retreat because taking care of subordinates was a leader's duty. The girl's words pierced his mind, making him remember what he had been fighting for all this time. The realization flashed in his thoughts: if he couldn't move, Nao would die. Gathering all his resolve, he desperately tried to force himself to move, understanding that he would no longer allow anyone to take a loved one from him. At that moment, the system activated the sprint skill, indicating that the remaining duration was 0.96 seconds. Akira realized that in this single moment, he had to put everything on the line. Akira breathed with difficulty, feeling his entire body consumed by heat as if he were burning from within. Exhaustion completely overtook him, making him realize he had long exceeded his limits. Yet, against all odds, he remained conscious, knowing he was still alive. The thought of Nao wouldn't let him give up, as he absolutely couldn't allow her to die. The remaining second was his last chance, and he was going to risk everything. The system notified him of the repeated use of the sprint skill, showing that the remaining time decreased from 0.71 seconds to 0.63 seconds. At that moment, the minotaur had almost touched Nao's head, threatening her with a fatal blow. Nao's words from the past resurfaced in Akira's mind. Back then, she had asked with warmth in her voice if anything bad had happened to him and offered to talk if something was bothering him. She said that even if all she could do was drink and laugh with him, that would be enough. Her words echoed in his head, reminding him of the promise he had made to her. In that moment, he swore that he would definitely save her one day, and she had smiled and replied that she would wait. This thought reignited his determination, and he realized he still had time. Grabbing the Minotaur's weapon, he resolutely moved towards his opponent, fully focused on the final strike. The system updated the timer again, showing that sprint was active for its last fractions of a second. First, 0.03 seconds remained, then 0.02, and finally 0.01 seconds. In that instant, Akira delivered the decisive blow, cleaving the Minotaur with one powerful movement. The ensuing silence filled the space, and everyone watching froze in stunned disbelief. People couldn't believe their eyes, realizing that the monster had been defeated. Nao stood in shock, unable to find words to express her emotions. The residents finally came to their senses and started talking, trying to process what they had just witnessed. They whispered amongst themselves, discussing with awe how this man had truly defeated the terrifying monster. The system officially confirmed the completion of the Class C quest, announcing victory over the Minotaur. As a reward for completing the mission, 50 points were awarded, along with a silver trophy for the major victory. Additionally, privileges were granted: a 20-unit increase in vitality, a 25-unit increase in muscular strength, and a 30-unit increase in speed. It was also confirmed that the Minotaur was a boss, and its defeat led to a slowdown in the global progress reversal. Akira's level increased from 30 to 38, and with that, he received 8 additional stat points. Akira's consciousness began to fade, but a final thought flashed through his mind: it was finally over. Nao rushed to him in a panic, calling out his name, unable to hold back her emotions. His strength completely left him, and he barely managed to whisper that she was alive before his body collapsed powerlessly to the ground. With trembling hands, Nao pulled him close, tears streaming down her cheeks as she desperately whispered why he had pushed himself to such a state. In a weak voice, Akira said he wanted her to listen to him, explaining what had happened before. However, before talking about anything important, he suggested they just have a drink together first. The system notified him of overcoming an internal disorder etched in his soul, and also of a new effect being added to his resurrection ability. The special skill gained an additional function, making the system's inventory and script elements accessible. As a result of the monster invasion that swept across both this country and the entire world, government institutions continued to crumble, losing their authority and control over the situation. The number of casualties, which began appearing from the very start of the catastrophe, had already exceeded 3 million, and that figure continued to steadily rise. Two men were discussing the current situation, exchanging information about their levels and trying to understand their chances of survival. One of them asked about the other's level, and he replied that he had reached level 7. In response, his companion stated that his level was 6. Pondering their prospects, they couldn't come to a definitive conclusion about whether they would survive this nightmare. One of them sighed, expressing disappointment, and remarked that it would be good to team up with that guy nicknamed the Bull. His partner looked puzzled and asked who he was talking about. The man then explained that this nickname referred to a person who had been talked about since the monsters first appeared. At that moment, their attention was drawn to a scene unfolding nearby. An unknown young man, possessing immense strength, knocked down an unknown bull-like creature using a massive axe. One of the men remarked with admiration that most likely this so-called bull was still in this city. Now concerned about her companion's condition, offered Akira an apple. However, he refused and advised her to take advantage of the opportunity herself. Now, realizing the difficulty of obtaining food under the circumstances, noted that such items were now rare, and if a chance to get them arose, it was best not to miss it. Hearing this, Akira felt grateful for her concern and thanked her. Lying in bed, he reflected on the events of the past few days. 2 days had passed since the battle with the Minotaur, during which he had apparently been unconscious. According to Nao, the hospital where they had taken shelter was protected by the country's self-defense forces, and for now, it could be considered relatively safe. Thanks to internet users who managed to get online during the first day of the disaster, humanity quickly became aware of the level and status system. Over time, this phenomenon became something commonplace. An active discussion erupted under one of the posts online, where people debated the new reality. One user expressed the opinion that talking about leveling up could turn a person into someone who would cease to be of any significance. Another user confirmed that the rumors circulating were true, and reported that a status window indeed existed. A question also arose in the discussion about whether others could see someone else's status. Another person commented that incredible courage was required for solo battles. Soon, someone admitted that they too had started seeing the very screen that had been talked about so much. Akira, processing the information he had heard, decided to discuss the matter of levels with Nao. However, when he turned to her, he found that she was distracted. She suddenly snapped out of it and quickly apologized for her inattentiveness. Then, showing concern, he asked how she was feeling and advised her to get some sleep to regain her strength. In response, Nao tried to assure him that everything was fine and said she wasn't tired. However, after a few moments, she couldn't resist and fell asleep anyway. Akira once again found himself deep in thought, realizing he had another problem to deal with regarding the progression rate. The system informed him that the global reversal coefficient had reached 2.66%. According to his calculations, 2 days had passed since the previous change, and this indicator was increasing by 1% per day. However, previously 1% accumulated in half a day, which indicated a significant slowdown in the progression rate. He concluded that this process was influenced by the decelerated growth rate, caused by the fact that after defeating the monster, the dynamics of the coefficients change noticeably shifted. Akira came to the realization that if no one took on the task of eliminating the bosses, the global reversal rate would continue to increase, and with it, the strength of the monsters would also grow. This would inevitably lead to a decrease in the chances of defeating them. The situation demanded decisive action, and someone had to take responsibility for eliminating the key threats. However, at the moment, he remained the only person capable of handling this task. Despite this, he perfectly understood that he wasn't striving to become a hero. Deep down, his sole goal remained protecting Nao. If he could keep her alive, that would be enough. Suddenly, he noticed Nao lying next to him in the same bed. This left him bewildered, and thoughts of the girl suddenly getting close to him instantly flooded his mind. An internal tremor seized him, and he hesitantly uttered her name. However, all he heard in response were incoherent sounds, indicating her deep sleep. Realizing she was just talking in her sleep, he decided not to disturb her and let her rest peacefully. He also noted a pleasant scent emanating from her, which he involuntarily caught. Meanwhile, he understood that his body was in a wounded state and he needed to do something to recover. Akira opened the system window to examine his stats, and detailed information about his current condition appeared before him. The list of parameters included his name, as well as his main physical indicators. His vitality was 65 units, muscle strength reached 115, stamina was at 84, speed was 99, and magical power was relatively low at only 13. Additionally, his luck stat was 39. Among his accumulated resources were 58 free points, which could be spent on improving characteristics or acquiring new abilities. A special skill called Resurrection particularly stood out among his other abilities. In addition, the list of available system functions now included Inventory and Script, indicating new possibilities that required further investigation. Among his acquired skills were several useful ones. Body Reinforcement had reached level 2, providing an additional boost to physical parameters. Analysis at level 1 allowed him to gather and process information. Magic Circuit, also at the same level, was likely related to using magical abilities. Sprint, also at level 1, gave him the ability to significantly increase his movement speed. Additionally, his stats displayed damage bonuses against specific enemy types. He gained a 3% damage increase when fighting goblins, and a similar bonus applied to battles with wolf packs. Against plant-class monsters, his attacks also became 3% stronger. And when facing beast-like monsters, his damage increased by 5%, making him a more effective fighter against those types of creatures. After evaluating his stats, he realized that despite his current strengths, he still needed to develop further to survive in this dangerous new world. Akira understood that difficult challenges lay ahead, requiring serious preparation. Despite his fatigue and doubts, he knew he couldn't afford to be weak, as not only his own future but also the fate of those he sought to protect depended on his actions. Akira noticed something new had appeared in his system. He focused on two unknown functions, inventory and script. It became clear to him that they had appeared after defeating the Minotaur, but he didn't understand what they actually were. The inventory resembled those found in games where various items could be stored. He decided to test it by bringing up the interface. It turned out that a smartphone had appeared in his inventory, but it didn't disappear from his hands as it might in a game. Not fully understanding how it worked, he removed the item from the list. The script remained the next unknown function. His attempt to activate it proved useless as the system reported that it was not currently activated. Realizing he couldn't use it yet and without any explanation of its purpose, Akira decided not to dwell on it. He could figure it out later when more information became available. Instead, he focused on what he had been looking forward to most, using his accumulated points to acquire new skills. However, before doing so, he noticed his magic power stat had unexpectedly decreased. His gaze lingered on the mysterious parentheses, which apparently displayed the original value. He also realized that the sprint skill didn't restore used magic, meaning magic power was a kind of gauge that determined how many times certain abilities could be used. This led him to conclude that skills for restoring magical energy should be prioritized. Having made his decision, he spent his accumulated points on acquiring new abilities. Soon, the system notified him that 4 new skills had been successfully acquired: Magic Power Restoration Level 1, Automatic Regeneration Level 1, Body Reinforcement Level 3, and Sixth Sense Level 1. Akira considered the need to check how long the Magic Restoration skill would take to work. The system provided a description of this ability, stating that it was a passive skill that allowed lost magic power to be replenished over time. The recovery speed depended on the skill level, making its development extremely important. After that, he switched to the second skill he acquired, Automatic Regeneration, designed to restore physical strength. The system explained that this passive skill gradually heals physical damage and restores the body to its original state over time. The regeneration speed, just like with magic, directly depended on the ability's level. Listening to his body, he realized the pain was slowly fading, which meant the regeneration was working effectively. Next, he checked the third skill he acquired, Body Strengthening, which cost him a hefty 30 points. The system displayed his updated parameters. Vitality remained the same, but muscle strength increased by 50, stamina also went up by 50, and speed received a similar boost. Akira realized that with the third level of this skill, his body's stats had significantly improved, and he could now fight even enhanced monsters without the limitations he felt before. The last skill on the list was Sixth Sense. This was an unusual ability aimed at developing intuition, which could be useful in critical situations. It cost 12 points, which seemed quite high compared to other skills. The system clarified that Sixth Sense is a passive skill that grants the user additional sensory abilities. Thanks to this skill, one could discern the true nature of things that couldn't be perceived by ordinary senses. The power of this ability depended on its level, and further development could unlock new possibilities. After analyzing his acquisitions, Akira found he had only 2 free points left. He considered whether to use them to increase his sprint power, which consumed magical energy. When he tried investing the remaining points into this parameter, he was surprised to find that the increase was 6 units, significantly exceeding his expectations. This made him realize that 1 point wasn't always equivalent to 1 enhancement unit, and he could shape his body more flexibly depending on his needs. This fact made him wonder if he should focus solely on physical stats, turning himself into a true fighter with immense physical strength. However, there was no time for contemplation. He had already become significantly stronger, and now he just had to wait for his recovery to be ready for battle again. His thoughts were interrupted when Nao suddenly woke up. She mumbled a greeting, a little disoriented, and then noticed their position. Her eyes widened, and she apparently just realized she was in the same bed as Akira. Akira tried to explain the situation, noting that the girl, half asleep, had simply laid down next to him, but it didn't seem to clarify what had happened much. He wondered why she hadn't moved away yet. Nao thought for a moment, then uttered a phrase that made him instantly blush. She quietly asked what would happen if she said she didn't want to get off. These words threw him off balance, and not knowing how to react, he just stared at her, stunned, feeling his heart race. Someone unexpectedly knocked on the door, drawing the attention of everyone inside. An unfamiliar man entered the room, immediately apologizing for his sudden appearance and disturbing their peace. He introduced himself as a major in the Japan Ground Self-Defense Force and asked to be called simply Karub. He then explained that as soon as he heard the news that Ichijo had regained consciousness, he immediately rushed here to speak with him personally. However, he quickly realized he might have been too hasty, so he apologized and urged them not to rush their answers and reactions. Now, noticing the situation unfolding, decided to intervene and expressed doubt that Karub had correctly understood the circumstances. She tried to draw his attention to the fact that things might not be as he thought. Karub, paying little attention to the girl's objection, calmly continued his speech, stating that he wouldn't take up too much of their time as he had a specific purpose. He stated his full name, introducing himself as Karub Minoru, and then added that the Japan Self-Defense Forces were currently actively defending the hospital from constant monster attacks. He also clarified that he wasn't carrying out this mission alone, but with some other people including Nanase. Akira, who had been listening intently to this conversation, suddenly became interested in the details and wanted to know if Nao was directly involved with the self-defense forces. Nao hesitated for a moment, surprised that she hadn't told him about it yet. However, after a few seconds, she calmly explained that there weren't actually many members of the self-defense forces, so those who were able to move and participate in battles, including herself, periodically fought alongside the military, providing them support in critical moments. Akira listened carefully to the girl's words and expressed his surprise, showing that he hadn't expected to hear such information. Karub, waiting for their short dialogue to end, addressed Ichijo again, reminding him that he had recently managed to defeat a minotaur. He noted that in recent days, discussions within their group increasingly suggested that it was thanks to Ichijo's actions that many city residents had managed to survive. He then expressed sincere gratitude for this feat, emphasizing that for them, Ichijo was not just a strong warrior, but a true savior and the sole hope for all of humanity. Akira, despite the praise, didn't attach much importance to his achievements and modestly stated that there was nothing outstanding about it. Karub, as if ignoring his response, continued his thought and emphasized that precisely for this reason, they had a very important request they intended to make of him. Before he could say anything else, another man entered the room, immediately drawing attention to himself. He greeted those present and casually remarked that he would only bother them for a minute. Then his gaze landed on Ichijo, and he asked him if he was indeed the person he had heard so much about. Akira wasn't sure how to react to the sudden appearance of this new person joining their conversation. Meanwhile, the man thoroughly examined him from head to toe, mentally assessing his appearance while also analyzing the information he had gathered about him. He noted to himself that if this was truly the young man who had defeated the boss monster, he looked far too weak and unimpressive. What particularly bothered him was the fact that Ichijo's level was only 9, which seemed incredibly low for someone capable of such a feat. After a brief moment of thought, the man concluded that Ichijo indeed looked exhausted and worn out, like a used rag, so relying on his help anytime soon was clearly out of the question. Karub, not hiding his displeasure, called him by name, pointing out that his name was Makimoto, and then directly asked him the purpose of his appearance. Makimoto, with a smirk, replied that he just decided to drop by to see what the person everyone was talking about looked like. But upon seeing him, he felt only disappointment, as he had expected something more. However, his attention quickly shifted when he noticed Nao. He looked at her with interest, then declared with unexpected enthusiasm that she was completely to his taste. Following this, he began to ask her how old she was, what her name was, and also inquired if she had truly been living here in the hospital all this time. Upon hearing an affirmative answer, Makimoto couldn't contain his admiration and openly admitted that in the previous place he had been, there were only boys whom he didn't even want to protect. However, in this hospital, in his opinion, everything was completely different. After a short pause, he unexpectedly announced that he had made a final decision. Nao would now be his girlfriend. Nao immediately became indignant, not believing her ears and not understanding how such a situation could even arise. Makimoto continued speaking, mentioning that due to the so-called global reversal coefficient, monsters were getting stronger, and he emphasized that Ichijo wouldn't be able to protect Nao, as he had most likely just gotten lucky in his fight with the boss. In contrast, Makimoto himself was level 25, which was considered the highest among everyone in the hospital. He added that he was the strongest one there, then suggested that Nao calmly discuss their future and invited her to his room. Nao, hearing this, tried to object. Akira, observing what was happening, couldn't stand by and firmly grabbed Makimoto's arm, making it clear that Nao was already getting nervous, and therefore strongly urged him to leave. Makimoto didn't expect such a reaction and tried to respond rudely. However, before he could say anything else, Akira squeezed his hand tighter. At that moment, a panicked thought flashed through Makimoto's mind as it felt like the guy was about to crush his hand. He couldn't understand where he got such incredible strength, given that his level was only 9. Makimoto quickly analyzed Akira's stats and realized that his numbers were far from maxed out. However, this didn't explain why his strength felt so terrifying, and he seriously began to fear for his life. Akira, noticing Makimoto's reaction, loosened his grip and apologized, explaining that he just wanted to hold him back slightly. Internally, he admitted that he had miscalculated his strength. Karub intervened in the situation and insisted that Makimoto leave the premises. Makimoto, angered, cursed, and left. Karub, addressing Akira and Nao, apologized for Makimoto's rude behavior. Akira didn't make a big deal out of it and suggested they return to the main topic of conversation, asking what their request was. Karub confirmed that monsters continued to attack the hospital and described how difficult the situation had become. He also reported that there were witnesses who had seen a figure resembling a boss monster. He then expressed concern that if this enemy got inside, they wouldn't be able to defeat it, and so he asked Akira to help them take down this boss. Akira took Karub's words as expected, showing no surprise or confusion. Now, observing the conversation, couldn't hide her emotions and voiced her opinion on the situation. She felt that asking Akira to fight again was too cruel, especially since he had recently battled a monster, faced mortal danger, and barely escaped with his life. In her opinion, his body hadn't fully recovered yet, meaning sending him into another battle was extremely unfair. Karub listened carefully to her objections and expressed understanding for her concern. However, he admitted that despite all the difficulties, he couldn't offer any other solution. He addressed Akira directly, reminding him that despite his low level, he had incredible stats. Not even wanting to ask about the young man's exact strength, he simply humbly asked for his help. He urged Akira to lend his strength for the sake of the survivors still left in this world. Akira listened carefully to the request and, without hesitation, gave his answer. He agreed to take on the task and told Karub to get up. Karub sincerely thanked him, expressing his deepest gratitude for the decision. After Karub left, Akira pondered, mentally assessing the entire situation. Subduing the boss monster seemed like an inevitable task, as there was simply no one else who could handle it. However, he had an internal doubt that he couldn't immediately articulate. Now, still worried, spoke again. She reiterated that the whole situation was too cruel. The mind-boggling, repetitive time loop he was caught in seemed endless. Although he had finally defeated the previous monster, he was once again forced to fight, but this time against a new enemy. The very fact that such a request was made on the day he had just woken up bothered her. She couldn't accept that his body hadn't recovered yet, and he was already being forced to risk his life again. In her opinion, he should have been given at least a short break to regain his strength. Akira looked at her, recognizing her genuine concern. He calmly replied that she wouldn't be able to fully understand him right now, but at some point he had already given up all hope of fighting. However, his courage had been restored, giving him the realization that he wasn't alone in this world. He admitted that Nao was the one who helped him regain the strength to fight. For this reason, he wasn't going to stop and was ready to fight to protect the one he cared about. He asked Nao not to worry about him, assuring her that he would do his best to defeat the boss. Nao, hearing his words, made a decision. She firmly stated that she would also go with him to subdue the boss. Akira was stunned by this declaration, as he hadn't expected such a decision from her. Nao, anticipating his reaction, continued speaking. She realized that if her true self went with him, she would most likely only be a burden. However, even so, she firmly wanted to fight by his side. The thought of him going alone to battle the boss seemed absolutely wrong and unfair to her. She sincerely asked him to take her with him. At that moment, a system message unexpectedly appeared. It announced that a special condition had been met and a new script called Nanase Now with You had been activated. The system explained that Nanase Now was aware of Akira's current state and wanted to help him. The new quest proposed joining forces with Nao to jointly defeat the boss that had appeared in this world. Akira froze in surprise, not understanding what this meant. The system continued to explain the conditions. It stated that accepting this script was not mandatory and he had the right to refuse it. The script's timeframe was limited to the current mission. While the script was active, Nanase Now would gain the ability to resurrect, similar to Akira's power. However, after the script concluded, she would lose this ability. The system asked a final question, offering Akira a choice: to activate the Nanase Now with You script or to decline it. Now noticed Akira's thoughtful expression and with slight concern asked what was wrong. Akira hesitated for a moment before replying that nothing special had happened, but a system window had unexpectedly popped up in front of him, announcing the activation of some script. Nao was curious and asked him what exactly he meant. She tried to reason out loud, concluding that perhaps the script's appearance was related to her intention to help him in battle. Akira, not entirely sure, admitted that he couldn't say for certain if that was the case yet. Nao continued to ponder, trying to make sense of all the information. Ultimately, she concluded that even if she were to die in battle, she would be able to revive thanks to the script. In her opinion, this ability was perfectly suited for their upcoming boss fight. Realizing this, she unhesitatingly suggested that Akira accept the script. Hearing this, Akira looked at her with a serious expression. He reminded her that resurrection wasn't just an incredible power that could grant a second life. This ability also carried a terrifying side, as it turned death into a tormenting, endless agony from which there was no escape, even if one wished to simply cease to exist at some point. Nao listened to his words but showed no doubt. She firmly stated that she understood but had already made her decision. No matter how much he tried to dissuade her, she wasn't going to back down from her intention. Akira mentally noted that from the very beginning, as soon as he started talking about it, Nao hadn't listened to his warnings even once. He paused for a moment, realizing that he couldn't just let Nao experience the same agony of death he had gone through. The only option left for him was to do everything possible to protect her at all costs. Having made his final decision, Akira warned her that there would be no turning back. Nao, remaining confident, replied that she understood. After that, Akira activated the script. The system immediately responded, announcing that the script Nanase Now Together With You had been successfully launched. From that moment on, Nao gained the ability to revive just like Akira. To successfully complete the script, they both had to defeat the boss monster together. Akira, understanding that they were now acting as one team, suggested that Nao use their status and skills together to prepare for the battle more effectively. Nao agreed, realizing how important their coordination was. She noticed that she could now see how many skills Akira had and was surprised to realize how strong he was. After that, she decided to look at her own status and began analyzing her characteristics, starting with her vitality. Akira unexpectedly remarked that he didn't need to listen to her enumeration, as with his current analysis level, he could see all her stats himself. Nao reacted sharply to his words, clearly shocked by this fact. The system displayed Nao's characteristics. Her level was 16, vitality was 18, muscle strength was 29, stamina was 27, speed was 28, magic power was 9, and luck was 18. Nao, seeing that Akira had already reviewed her characteristics, indignantly declared that he was violating her right to personal space. Akira, puzzled, asked her what she meant, not understanding why she reacted that way. Nao explained that status could be compared to personal data. Moreover, it listed not only combat characteristics but also details such as height, weight, and even other parameters that were too personal for her. The thought of someone viewing such information without permission clearly displeased her. Akira mentally noted that he hadn't noticed such items in her status, which made him ponder. Nao continued to muse, acknowledging that there were currently no ways to prevent unauthorized access to this data. However, she advised Akira to be especially careful as his position was already attracting too much attention. She reminded him that he was already being called the Bull, which apparently had become part of his reputation. Akira, hearing this, was surprised and asked her what exactly she meant. Nao reminded Akira that on the very evening he managed to defeat the Minotaur, his image immediately appeared on social media. She opened a post she found online and showed him a picture where he was captured with a perfectly steady gaze, looking directly into the camera. Below the image was a caption that read "The Bull." Akira felt some confusion about being called that, but decided to first apologize to Nao for using analysis and reviewing her characteristics without her permission. However, his attention quickly returned to the nickname he had been given. Nao, genuinely surprised, asked why he didn't like it. In her opinion, the bull sounded impressive and even cool, so he shouldn't worry about such a nickname. Akira, not wanting to dwell on that conversation, suggested they return to discussing more important topics. He wanted to discuss what skills Nao had acquired to properly distribute roles in battle. Nao, focusing on his words, began to list her abilities. Her arsenal included 3 skills: body reinforcement, magic circuit, and entry-level magic. Akira paid special attention to the last one, interested in its capabilities, and asked what exactly it entailed. The system immediately provided an explanation. According to the information received, the owner of the entry-level magic skill gains the impact arrow ability. The damage this ability can inflict depends on the owner's magic power level. Furthermore, the number of spells that can be mastered within this skill is directly related to the ability's level. After reading the data, Akira unexpectedly admitted that he had expected something completely different. In his mind, Nao should have relied solely on physical strength. Nao didn't immediately understand what he meant, so she asked him again, looking puzzled. Akira realized his words might have sounded a bit harsh and quickly added that it was just a joke with no hidden meaning. Nao looked at him carefully, then calmly stated that her physical build didn't allow her to be a close combat warrior. However, if she had to choose from the available options, magic seemed the most suitable for her. At that moment, she noticed Akira's expression change again, which annoyed her, and she demanded an explanation. Akira, not wanting to dwell on the topic, tried to steer the conversation in another direction. He asked her a more practical question about magic power consumption. In his opinion, perhaps the cost of using magic could decrease over time. Nao thought about it, then replied that when she activates magic, her body starts to heat up from the inside, and after a few uses, she feels extremely tired. The sensation she gets is similar to running at full speed, exerting maximum effort. She clarified that beginner-level magic is activated by depleting physical strength, not solely magical energy. Akira, after hearing her explanation, got a general idea of her fighting style and suggested they divide roles in battle. He would go first, and Nao would cover him from the rear. Nao agreed to his plan but expressed concern about his condition. She asked if his body had truly recovered completely. Akira assured her that thanks to his automatic regeneration ability, he felt better every hour. He was confident that he would be able to move fully by tomorrow. Hearing this, Nao advised him to rest, reminding him that recovering his strength before a fight was just as important as the battle itself. Then she added that she was leaving. Akira thanked her for her concern. Nao wished him a good night. Akira returned the wish before she left. The system registered a change in the global reversal coefficient, which reached 3.01%. Nao went outside to get some fresh air and clear her head. Karub noticed her, called out, and asked why she wasn't asleep yet. He admitted he wasn't thrilled about having to stay alone outside the hospital, even if he was just standing in front of the main entrance. Nao explained that she just wanted to get some fresh air, then she asked if he was on patrol. Karub confirmed it, explaining that monsters were only active at night, so his job was to monitor the situation. Then he asked about Akira's condition. Nao thought for a moment and replied that he would most likely be fully ready for battle by tomorrow. Then she added with a hint of sadness that Akira always put himself second, caring for others first rather than himself. Karub listened carefully to her words, then looked at her intently and cautiously suggested that Nao might have romantic feelings for Akira. Nao instantly became flustered, stumbled over her words, and started making excuses. She declared that there was nothing of the sort. Then, trying to explain herself, she said that their fates had become intertwined back in middle school, and that was the reason for their current closeness. Karub, hearing her explanation, nodded understandingly but didn't pursue the topic. Nao continued speaking but didn't manage to finish her thought. At that moment, something suddenly fell from above. Meanwhile, Akira, in his room, focused on the task ahead. He reminded himself that his priority right now was to defeat the boss. He tried to convince himself that his condition was stable. He realized he was no longer alone, as there was someone by his side who wanted to fight with him. This realization gave him strength. He mentally repeated that he would never be alone again. At that moment, the system suddenly displayed a new message. It notified him that the "Together with You" script was progressing. A moment later, a new, much more alarming alert appeared. The death of Nanase now had been detected. In response, the system automatically activated the special skill, Resurrection. Akira froze, not immediately understanding what had just happened. Panic began to well up inside him. His breathing became erratic and a crushing sensation filled his chest. He felt himself losing consciousness. Akira returned to the past, and when he opened his eyes, he realized he was in a hospital room. Looking around carefully, he tried to comprehend what was happening and why he was there. Reflecting, he concluded that the screen's appearance was triggered by Nao's death. After that, the resurrection ability activated, which should have brought him back. However, he now found himself at a completely different point in time, not the very night the monster invasion began. His new respawn point was different from the previous one. This likely happened because he had defeated the boss, the Minotaur. A feeling of anger and disappointment welled up in his chest, as he had promised himself he wouldn't let Nao die again. Despite all his efforts, reality turned out differently. At that moment, the door opened and Nao entered the room. Akira felt an incredible sense of relief seeing her and joyfully told her he was glad she survived. Nao, hesitating slightly, replied that she had actually died. Hearing her words, Akira tried to make sense of what was happening and asked her to explain what had occurred. Nao looked at him and began to recount how everything unfolded. She had gone outside for some fresh air and stopped by the main entrance. A little while later, Karub approached her and they had a brief conversation. It was at that moment that a monster attacked her. The memories of what happened made her shudder with fear. She confessed that she couldn't clearly see who attacked her because everything happened too quickly. The only thing she remembered was a huge black silhouette like a beast which looked truly terrifying. After that, she found herself standing at the main entrance again, and the surroundings were no different from how they were before her death. This meant that she had been resurrected after dying. Akira listened carefully and concluded that the situation was unfavorable. There was a high probability that the monster would attack again tonight. Nao looked at him with a guilty expression and said that because of her death, he was back in his previous state. Hearing her words, Akira quickly reassured her and asked her not to blame herself for what happened. Now that the resurrection point had changed, it would have happened sooner or later anyway, and he would have had to return to this moment again. Nao pondered for a moment, then asked why the resurrection point had changed. Akira admitted that he didn't know the exact answer himself but suggested they not dwell on it. It was far more important now to prepare for the monster's attack. Agreeing with him, Nao said she would tell Karub and the others everything. Troubling suspicions began to form in Akira's mind. Everything was far more complicated than he had initially assumed. If one of them died, the resurrection ability would activate and the other would share the same fate. Furthermore, it was a huge factor that the restart occurred when he wasn't in his best condition. The question of whether he could protect Nao under such circumstances filled him with deep doubt. However, thoughts of failure had no right to exist. He firmly decided that he would do everything possible to protect her, no matter the cost. The thought of having to see her in that state again seemed unbearable to him. Deciding it was time to act, Akira got out of bed. Nao looked at him anxiously and asked how he was feeling. Akira looked at her and replied that his condition had significantly improved, even though he felt pain all over his body. There were still a few hours until the monster attack, so he hoped he would have some time to recover. He decided to take a walk to stretch his body and asked Nao to stay there and wait. Nao, a little flustered, nodded and said she understood. Akira left the room and went to explore the building, but soon realized he was lost. Apparently, the elevators were no longer functioning. He remembered that every time he found himself in such huge hospitals, he invariably got lost in the corridors. There was still enough time before the monsters appeared, so he decided to use it to memorize the layout of the rooms. Suddenly, a man with an anxious expression appeared before him. He loudly announced that monsters had broken through and urged everyone who could fight to report to the location immediately. Akira instantly tensed up and asked exactly where the attack had occurred. The worried man reported that the monsters had attacked the lobby at the main entrance. The Black Wolves had attacked so quickly that the defenders hadn't had time to react properly. Self-defense force fighters were currently battling them, but the number of enemies was too great. Akira frowned, remembering that one of those wolves had attacked Nao. Expressing his gratitude for the information, he wasted no time heading to the battle. Thoughts of what was happening wouldn't leave him alone. By his calculations, the attack should have been several hours away. It was likely that their warning to Karub and the others had influenced the monsters' actions and led to change in their strategy. Whatever the case, he couldn't afford to delay. Meanwhile, in the lobby, the situation was becoming increasingly tense. The self-defense forces were struggling to hold back the enemy's onslaught and soon began shouting that they couldn't take it anymore. One of the fighters, addressing the commander, reported that Karub was no longer able to continue fighting. Karub, despite his critical condition, continued to urge the self-defense forces to hold on and not retreat. But the number of enemies kept growing, and the situation was becoming critical. The black wolves had practically wiped out all the fighters. Karu, breathing heavily, surveyed the battlefield. Deep down, he knew that victory was no longer possible. The opponents significantly outnumbered them and were far stronger. In such a situation, they had no chance of success. However, even in this predicament, he wasn't going to give up. The only thing he could do was buy a little time for the survivors. At that moment, Akira suddenly appeared before him, stepping between him and the enemies. Akira looked at him and, with a serious expression, said that he was late, but now he was taking control of the situation. Karub watched in surprise as Akira easily knocked back several black wolves with just one blow. Akira's attention was drawn to a massive three-headed wolf towering over the others. Apparently, this was the leader. Despite the seriousness of the situation, Akira felt a rush of adrenaline. He was confident that this fight would be an excellent warm-up for even more serious challenges. Nao approached the battle, looking worriedly at the battlefield, and asked Karub if he was okay. Karub, breathing heavily after the struggle, replied that it was too dangerous to go any further. Akira was fighting there at the moment, and interfering would be reckless. The self-defense forces, observing what was happening, discussed the situation tensely. One of them exclaimed that the monster's attack was too fierce. Another added that they needed to do something urgently before Akira also died. The black wolf lunged forward, aiming directly at Akira. A thick cloud of dust rose at the moment of impact, obscuring the collision site from view. One of the self-defense forces whispered in fear that this was the end. The second, watching the dust cloud in horror, declared that Akira was dead. However, as the dust cleared slightly, Akira's figure became visible again. He stood his ground, not moving an inch, his hand effortlessly holding back the wolf's powerful attack. He himself was impressed by his own stamina, noting that his stats had improved for the better with body strengthening. All that remained was to check how much his muscular strength had increased. Shifting his gaze to the monster, Akira spoke. He was sure that this was the very beast that had killed Nao. Now it was time for revenge. Without hesitation, he delivered a powerful knee strike. The self-defense forces who witnessed this spectacle froze in astonishment. One of them gasped, unable to believe his eyes. The second, encouraged, began shouting words of support, urging Akira to destroy the remaining monsters. Nao watched Akira intently, and her gaze suddenly fixed on his wounds. Meanwhile, he noticed the remaining wolves, who were frozen in indecision. A threat laced his voice as he declared that it was their turn now. However, anxiety was building up inside him. He realized his injuries were far more serious than he'd initially thought. This opponent had been a tough one. Suddenly, he felt a strange, oppressive atmosphere that made his hair stand on end. This sensation was painfully familiar. It reminded him of the moment he'd faced the minotaur. A logical conclusion formed in his mind. This wolf wasn't the leader, it was just a pawn. Someone else was higher up, controlling them. This thought made him even more wary. If the real boss appeared right now, he wouldn't stand a chance of winning in his current state. The question of what to do in this situation gnawed at him. Suddenly, the battlefield fell silent. The self-defense forces looked around in confusion. One of them mumbled that the howling had stopped, not understanding what had happened. Another anxiously noted that the remaining wolves had suddenly turned and fled. Akira watched their escape with cold determination. He realized they hadn't just run away, they had carried off the bodies of the fallen self-defense forces. That howl had been a command to retreat. Another unsettling thought crossed his mind. 7 self-defense force members had died in this battle. Considering the remaining people capable of fighting, less than half of their total number were left. Their average skill level was around 18. The situation was getting worse. The only way out was to destroy the monsters raiding the hospital as quickly as possible. They had to be eliminated before they had time to grow stronger. However, he noticed one important aspect. The strength of these monsters hadn't significantly changed yet. While their reaction speed had increased, it didn't necessarily mean their power had grown as much. Suddenly, system information appeared before his eyes. It displayed the characteristics of one of the wolves. Its level was 25, vitality reached 30, muscle strength was 45, and stamina was 52. Speed was the highest characteristic at 70. Magic power was relatively low, and the luck stat stopped at 23. Nao approached closer and looked at Akira with a sense of guilt. She said she hadn't been able to help him at all in the fight, then asked if that monster had been the boss. Akira, exhaling heavily, replied that it was just a small fry. The leader was still somewhere nearby. Nao pondered this, then expressed confusion as to why the monsters had attacked so early. Akira hypothesized that their initial target had always been this hospital. Next time, they should act the same way they did last time to avoid changing the enemy's sequence of actions. Nao agreed with his conclusion but then looked at his arm with concern. She reminded him of his wounds and asked how he was feeling. Akira assured her he was fine, thanks to automatic regeneration. However, he realized that in the future, relying solely on punches would make it difficult to deal with enemies. He thought it would be good to have a stronger weapon. At that moment, his gaze caught Nao and he noticed she was watching someone. Curiosity made him ask who that person was. Nao looked away and replied that it was Kashiwabu, who was collecting materials from the monster bodies using her dissection skill. A new idea instantly sparked in Akira's mind. He remembered that in games, materials obtained from monsters are usually used to craft weapons and armor. If they applied this principle here, perhaps they could get powerful equipment. Without wasting time, he approached Kashiwabu. Addressing her, he apologized for the unexpected appearance and confirmed her name. The girl flinched in surprise, then turned to him. Her reaction surprised Akira. A child stood before him, which seemed strange. He asked if she was okay. The girl looked a bit nervous but quickly composed herself. She called him Ox-guy and, stumbling slightly, asked if he was indeed Akira. Akira confirmed this, then asked her if she was collecting materials. He wanted to know if she could craft weapons for him. Kashiwabu seemed a little flustered and, lowering her head, apologized, explaining that she didn't have the necessary skill yet. Akira felt a slight disappointment but hid it, saying that in that case it was fine. Looking at the girl, he thought she seemed to often get lost in her own thoughts. Suddenly, Kashiwabu asked a question. She curiously inquired why he wasn't using that axe since it was called the Bull's Cleaver. Akira suddenly remembered the Minotaur's axe, which had completely slipped his mind. This axe should be powerful enough to help him stand against an even stronger boss. Kashiwabu noted that the weapon should still be where he left it. Moreover, she mentioned that its digital stats were very high. Akira looked at Kashiwabu in surprise, hearing an unfamiliar term from her, and asked her to explain what she meant by digital stats. Kashiwabu readily clarified that weapons, like creatures, have their own status. With the right skill, one can learn its characteristics. Akira became interested and asked if she could tell him the Minotaur's axe's status. Kashiwabu nodded, confirming that with the appraisal skill, one could determine the digital values of any weapon. As an example, she cited the pistols used by the self-defense forces. Their striking power only increases by 2 points. Hearing this, Akira became even more eager to know the axe's stats. Kashiwabu hesitated slightly, noting that her information was as accurate as possible thanks to the appraisal skill, but some parameters might remain hidden. The Fierce Bull's Cleaver requires a minimum of 80 units of muscle strength to use. Striking power is 75. Durability is 37. The weapon's additional effect remains hidden due to the user's insufficient level. Akira carefully examined the provided data. He quickly realized that the weapon's striking power would add to his current muscle strength, which was already 165. If his calculations were correct, this weapon would be incredibly powerful. Moreover, with the minimal muscle strength requirements, he wouldn't have any problems, meaning it was worth spending time looking for the axe. Gratitude for the information was evident in his voice as he sincerely thanked Kashiwabu. The girl shyly waved her hand, assuring him it was nothing. Akira suddenly pondered and asked her if she would be able to appraise weapons again in the future if he found something new. However, Kashiwabu unexpectedly lowered her head and confessed that she didn't have the appraisal skill. Akira froze, stunned by what he heard, and asked again if that was really true. Kashiwabu quickly explained that she had once accidentally overheard a conversation from one of the self-defense forces fighters who had that skill. However, that person had already died, so now no one with such an ability remained. Akira listened carefully, processing the new information. Kashiwabu added that in the future, she intended to master skills related to weapon and armor production. If she ever succeeded in this, she would be able to offer her help and even give discounts. A new idea formed in Akira's mind. He realized that people who didn't want to fight could focus on creating weapons and armor to support the fighters. If Kashiwabu truly took up crafting, she could significantly increase their group's combat effectiveness. Now, observing their conversation, pouted and turned away. Akira noticed this and, surprised, called her name. Nao looked at him with slight resentment and sarcastically remarked that he had already managed to befriend Kashiwabu. Then she added with a hint of sarcasm that even at a time like this, he was still trying to charm girls. Akira instantly became flustered and tried to explain, saying he was just asking her about weapons. Then he changed the subject, announcing that he was going to retrieve the Minotaur's axe. Now, without waiting for him to finish his sentence, noted that he was deliberately changing the subject. Akira waved his hands in confusion, trying to justify himself, but now had already looked away. Sighing, she said that in that case she would go with him as she wanted to level up. Akira frowned, thinking she should rest a bit. In his opinion, leveling up could be postponed for at least a day. Nao sharply raised her head and reminded him that he himself had said they should work together. Then she smirked and added that it seemed he would prefer to take Kashiwabo with him instead. It didn't matter to her anyway since she could level up on her own. Akira sighed heavily, admitting defeat, and said they would go together. As they moved through the ruined city, Akira carefully scanned the surroundings. Only 3 days had passed since the invasion began, but everything was already in ruins. Nao looked around and agreed with him. Akira frowned, realizing they needed to proceed with extreme caution. He asked Nao to stay a little further back, warning her that in such areas among broken electrical poles, they could run into danger. Stopping, he examined the tracks on the ground. They indicated that monster boars had been rampaging here, meaning they could still be nearby. Akira suddenly stopped and cautioned her. He asked what would happen if someone suddenly attacked her from a blind spot. Nao snorted and shook her head, saying he had become overly cautious. Akira looked at Nao intently, reminding her that many monsters in the city were much higher level than her. That's why they needed to stay vigilant. Besides, one pistol couldn't kill a strong opponent, and relying solely on it would be reckless. Nao, hearing his words, nodded thoughtfully. She explained that having a firearm helped her aim and more accurately determine the direction in which she intended to use magic. However, Karub, despite her requests, never wanted to entrust her with a pistol. Akira understood her point of view and didn't bring up the matter again. Nao enthusiastically talked about how shooting magic from a pistol sounded really cool. Akira, noticing her raise the pistol, instantly tensed up. He immediately warned her not to point the weapon at him. A thought flashed through his mind that Nao sometimes acted unexpectedly childish, showing playfulness even in such moments. Nao suddenly changed the subject, expressing doubt that the Minotaur's axe was still in the same place. It was an incredibly powerful weapon, and she thought someone might have already taken it. Akira, pondering Nao's words, concluded that the likelihood of the axe being gone was extremely low. He recalled that even 4 self-defense force fighters couldn't lift it, meaning it was unlikely anyone else could have carried away such a heavy weapon. Most likely, the axe was still where he left it, waiting for its owner. However, the next moment, another problem alerted him. He noticed several large shadows flickering in the sky. Memories of a monster resembling a giant bird of prey quickly surfaced in his mind. It was a roc. Akira knew perfectly well how dangerous it was. Its main ability was to spew a sticky liquid from its mouth that paralyzed its victim's movement. Moreover, this monster was constantly in flight, making it a difficult target. Even if one managed to hit it, its tough skin could withstand the blow, while the attacker risked injuring their hand. He immediately realized it was better to avoid a fight with this creature. Now, noticing he had frozen, asked worriedly if he could handle such an opponent alone. If it was too dangerous, perhaps she could help. Akira, not wanting to put her at risk, firmly stated that these monsters were not suitable opponents for her. He assured her he would handle it himself and asked her to hide and not move. He just needed to quickly grab the axe and leave without attracting unnecessary attention. However, his plan collapsed the moment he tried to take a step forward. His legs suddenly refused to move. Looking down, he saw that he was stuck in a viscous, sticky liquid. Thoughts began to race frantically through his head. It turned out he had fallen into a trap. He had been too hasty, not expecting the birds to have already sprayed their nasty vomit, turning the axe into bait. As soon as he realized his mistake, the birds immediately went on the attack. Now, noticing the danger, screamed and told him to get down. Akira looked up and saw her rushing forward. He called out to her with concern, asking if she understood she was heading to certain death. Now didn't stop. With anger in her voice, she declared that he was wrong to underestimate her. She was capable of fighting too. Raising her hand, she concentrated and activated a magic skill. Initial magic, impact arrow. A bright ball of energy burst from her hand and shot straight at one of the birds. When the attack hit its target, Nao looked at Akira smugly and asked if he still thought these monsters were no match for her. Akira assessed her actions with surprise and, acknowledging her strength, said he took back his words. Now this battle was in her hands. Pushing through the viscous liquid, he reached out and finally grabbed the axe. He mentally analyzed the situation. These birds had high stamina, making them tough opponents. However, he now had a weapon capable of piercing their defenses. Clenching the handle, he swung and delivered a powerful chopping blow. The blade sliced through one of the birds, cutting it in half. Akira looked at the weapon in his hands with satisfaction. He now possessed incredible strength. With a muscular strength rating of 165 plus 75, his attacks had become truly devastating. In his hands was the ferocious bull's cleaver. Nao immediately turned to him and asked worriedly how he was feeling. Akira smiled, confirming that he was in excellent condition. Now they had a plan. He would wear down the opponents and Nao would deliver the finishing blows. In this place, they could significantly raise their levels. Nao nodded, agreeing with his suggestion. However, despite the battle going well, a strange feeling arose in Akira's mind. At that moment, everything seemed to be going as it should, but deep down, a sense of unease lingered. Nao and Akira continued to fight the monsters, not allowing the enemies to get close to them. One by one, the creatures fell under their blows, and soon the battlefield was momentarily empty. Nao looked around, assessing the situation, and then turning to Akira, informed him that there were no more opponents visible nearby. She expressed hope that this was the last enemy. Akira carefully looked around, considering her words, and concluded that there were indeed no new monsters left in the vicinity. He shifted his gaze to Nao and asked what level she had reached after all these battles. Nao pondered, quickly checked her stats, and reported that her level was now 23. Akira nodded, evaluating her progress, and noted that she had advanced significantly. A thought flashed through his mind that their progress was going very well. They were not only dealing with enemies but also actively raising their levels. For now, it was especially important to reach a high level as quickly as possible, as she would have to fight black wolves. Without proper preparation, it would be incredibly difficult to stand against these opponents. Nao looked at him and shared her observations. She noted that now only black wolves were attacking and their ferocity was only increasing. They weren't retreating or easing their assault. On the contrary, they were becoming more aggressive. Akira agreed with her, noting that they had already destroyed over 20 black wolves, but the attacks were still continuing. At that moment, system information suddenly appeared before his eyes. The system notified him that he had received the silver trophy Wolf Slayer. This title increased the hostility of the wolf race by 40 units and also granted a 7% damage bonus against wolves. Akira pondered, analyzing this information. He concluded that the constant wolf attacks were precisely linked to this trophy. After obtaining it, the hostility from these monsters sharply increased, and now they were pursuing him with even greater persistence. Realizing this, he understood that from a leveling perspective, it was even beneficial. A large number of opponents allowed for faster experience gain and level-ups. Despite this, he noticed that Nao looked tired. Approaching her, he looked at her carefully and asked with concern how she was feeling. Nao, breathing heavily, assured him that she was fine, but her voice betrayed her exhaustion. Akira immediately understood that the cause of her condition was excessive magic use. She had expended too much vitality, which had weakened her body. He suggested she take a short break, pointing to a safer spot nearby. Nao looked at the axe Akira held in his hands, her gaze filled with admiration. She admitted that the weapon truly amazed her. The axe's blade was so sharp that the black wolves were cut down like pieces of butter. Akira chuckled, agreeing with her words, and confessed that he himself was surprised when he first used the weapon. Comparisons to his previous reality surfaced in his mind. This axe possessed incredible power, significantly different from anything he had known before. He confidently concluded that the Minotaur's axe was a truly powerful weapon. Akira thought that if he could enhance this weapon to its limit, he could fearlessly engage even a boss in battle. Nao watched him intently, and her expression suddenly turned worried. She frowned when she saw him carelessly twirling the axe in his hands and told him to be more careful, reminding him that such a weapon required careful handling. Akira paused for a moment, recalling the potential risk. If he died, he would have to retrieve the axe again, which would be incredibly tedious. At that moment, a new idea sparked in his mind. He remembered the inventory function. If he tried to place the axe there, perhaps it would remain with him even after resurrection. Nao watched him with a slight smile. She noticed that he looked incredibly excited and compared him to a child who had just received a new toy. Nao, having regained her strength, stood up and said that she felt fine now, suggesting they continue leveling up. Akira looked at her with doubt, believing she should still rest a bit longer. Nao shook her head, insisting that they needed to move on quickly. Suddenly, they heard a noise. Akira tensed, listening to the sounds, and concluded that monsters were attacking someone nearby. Nao looked at him and suggested they go help. Akira agreed, but warned her that before intervening, they needed to understand exactly what was happening. He reminded her that helping without understanding the situation could be dangerous. now nodded, indicating that she had remembered his words. Akira fully focused on the source of the noise, determining that the voice was coming from very close by. He became alert, scanning the surroundings, trying to pinpoint where the sound was coming from. Suddenly, a man appeared before him. His appearance was so unexpected that Akira flinched, but he quickly composed himself, rapidly assessing the situation. He looked at the stranger, trying to determine his condition, and asked if he was all right. The man, without stopping, merely snapped irritably that they were in his way, then continued running without even bothering to explain the situation. Akira watched him go, puzzled, wondering what could have scared him so much. Suddenly, Nao froze. All her confidence vanished instantly, replaced by an expression of panicked terror. Her skin paled and her hands trembled. With a trembling voice, she called out to Akira and, moving with difficulty, raised her hand, pointing forward. An enormous crowd of monsters appeared before them. Nao shrieked in panic. Her eyes widened and fear completely paralyzed her movements. She couldn't tear her gaze away from the horrifying sight. Akira, understanding the danger of the situation, immediately pulled her back, urging her to stay close to him so they could retreat quickly. However, Nao couldn't move. Her body was completely paralyzed by fear. She whispered, her voice strained, that she couldn't move her legs as if they were rooted to the ground. Akira, without wasting any time, instantly scooped her into his arms and tried to run, relying on his speed and agility. But it wasn't enough. They didn't manage to escape. A huge monster darted forward with lightning speed and pierced Nao with its stinger. Akira froze in place. His mind refused to accept what he had seen. A terrifying image flashed before his eyes, everything inside him constricted. The system activated, coldly announcing the inevitable. The script progressed with him. The death of Nanase now was confirmed. The special skill resurrection was automatically applied. When he opened his eyes again, he was in a familiar setting. Akira woke up in a hospital. Memories flooded over him, filling his mind. He slowly got to his feet, his movements a little stiff. Akira, without hesitation, headed towards the room where Nao was. Stopping before the door, he quietly said her room number, as if confirming he was in the right place. Then, without hesitation, he called out to her, asking how she was feeling. A faint voice came from behind the door. Nao, hearing him, said his name with a hint of surprise, her voice sounding tired and weak. Akira, hearing her response, confirmed his presence. He was about to open the door when Nao suddenly stopped him sharply. She curtly demanded that he leave her alone. Akira froze for a moment, his fingers clenching into a fist. A disturbing thought raced through his mind. He bitterly realized that the terrible incident had left a deep mark on Nao's mind, breaking her psyche. Nao heard her own voice, exhausted, hoarse, filled with pain and despair, as if she was calling out to someone in a last hope, begging for the suffering to end, to stop the pain that pierced her entire being. These words burst forth as if from the depths of her subconscious, like a cry from the soul, escaping the abyss into which she had plunged at the moment of death. When she slowly opened her eyes, her mind was still hazy, and her body felt empty and heavy. However, after a few moments, it dawned on her that she was alive. The hospital building was suddenly attacked by gigantic and aggressive bees, causing panic and chaos among those inside. Karub quickly turned to Nao, noticing her state, and with anxiety in his voice, asked her to be careful, expressing concern about her condition. Inside, Nao mentally recalled that this had happened before Akira woke up, and she realized with certainty that she had died before and her resurrection process had reactivated. Memories of death caused a paralyzing fear within her, and because of this, Nao couldn't move, as if terror had bound her body. Karub, understanding the seriousness of the situation, urgently told his subordinates to get Nao to a safe place, away from danger, as quickly as possible. While in the room, Nao, overwhelmed by fear, admitted aloud to herself that she was scared of monsters, and couldn't cope with her memories. Meanwhile, Akira in his room was angry at himself for letting Nao die again, and concluded that perhaps he was incapable of ensuring her safety. Karub entered Akira's room, formally introducing himself as a major in the Japan Ground Self-Defense Force, and politely asked to be called simply Karub. Akira immediately remembered that Karub was supposed to visit him that evening, and comparing the events, he confirmed that everything was repeating exactly as before, without the slightest discrepancy, including the Black Wolf attack that was supposed to happen later. Karub drew Akira's attention to the Minotaur's axe nearby, which he had previously defeated, and cautiously suggested that perhaps this item was his power. Akira was surprised and for a moment didn't understand what he was talking about, but then he looked around and indeed noticed that he hadn't paid attention to the item, and wondered if it was there because he had placed it in his inventory beforehand. He admitted that perhaps this was indeed the manifestation of his power which he would have to deal with going forward. In his thoughts, Akira firmly decided that it was too early to give up and that he must continue to fight no matter what. Getting up, he showed determination to act and not back down. Karub asked him about his intentions, watching his actions with concern. Akira explained that he was going to fight the boss and fulfill what he considered his duty, and he mentioned that a sudden attack by black wolves was expected, so he asked everyone to stay away from the main lobby entrance to avoid danger. Approaching Nao's room, he knocked and warned that he was about to enter. When he entered, he saw Nao huddled in the corner of the room, clearly experiencing extreme stress. With sincere regret, Akira said that if he had been able to protect her, none of this would have happened. Nao interrupted him, not allowing him to blame himself, and admitted that everything that happened was her fault because she got involved in the fight without enough strength, and moreover, she put his life in danger. She spoke with admiration and bitterness, saying that he was incredible because he had died many times, each time returning to life and starting over, no matter how strong the pain was. Nao confessed that she could no longer fight because whenever she saw monsters, scenes of her own death flashed before her eyes and fear completely overwhelmed her. Akira, wanting to comfort her, wrapped her in a warm blanket and told her she didn't need to fight anymore, promising he would finish everything himself. He also explained that to lift the resurrection effect, they needed to defeat the boss together, so he only asked for her help at the very end, and until then, she could relax and be safe. After that, he left her room, carrying a firm resolve. He confirmed to himself that it was indeed better for him to fight alone as he always had before, and he didn't want Nao to suffer again. He began to consider that the mass appearance of monsters, the attack on the hospital, and the actions of the black wolves might have been caused by the emergence of a boss monster in the city that controlled these wolves. Akira suspected that this monster might have scared other monsters, causing them to flee, which led to the concentration of creatures. He realized he needed to confirm his suspicions, but then noticed there were still people in the lobby. Understanding the threat, he urgently warned them to leave immediately as monsters would soon arrive. Two men reacted with confusion, and one of them wondered who this person even was. Akira repeated that black wolves would burst in within minutes, and if they didn't want to die, they should leave as soon as possible. Makimoto, recognizing him as the person Karub had spoken positively about, expressed contempt and displeasure at his gaze. The other man in the group joked that someone seemed to have angered Makimoto. Makimoto, continuing to show disdain, called Akira a weakling and stated that he couldn't influence his behavior. But at that moment, a black wolf appeared and Makimoto immediately got scared, realizing the danger was real. Akira firmly stated that if they didn't want to die, they should leave immediately. Karub, meanwhile, urged everyone to remain vigilant and assured them that even if the monsters broke through, they would be able to hold their ground. The soldiers, observing what was happening, began to realize that they were facing a person with truly impressive strength. In his thoughts, Karub made a comparison, noting that the battle Akira was waging resembled a fight with Satan himself. It was that fierce and merciless. Everyone watched as Akira calmly and with incredible power fought the black wolves, giving them no chance whatsoever. Addressing one of the surviving wolves, he calmly stated that he had left it alive specifically so it could lead him to their boss's lair. Akira reached the place which turned out to be the enemy's lair and expressed his readiness to move forward, thereby showing his determination to continue his journey. He slowly and persistently descended into the underground space, feeling an increasing internal anxiety. He noted in his thoughts that the number of corpses scattered around had significantly increased, which only intensified this ominous premonition, so similar to the feeling he experienced in the battle with the minotaur. He continued moving downward, realizing that the depths of the dungeon concealed even greater evil. Black wolves appeared in his path and he stopped, assessing the threat. Akira immediately understood that without his axe he couldn't stand against such a number of enemies, but more than that, he felt an unusually strong, oppressive presence of something monstrous. The system displayed the opponent's data. A werewolf boss, level 93 with impressive stats, vitality 237, muscular strength 213, stamina 254, speed 412, magic power 70, luck 51. After realizing these stats, Akira admitted that with the current difficulty coefficient, he couldn't even dream of comparing this enemy to a minotaur, as the opponent significantly outmatched him. Even with the ferocious bull's cleaver in his current state, he would still most likely be killed. Akira concluded that he had gathered enough information and should retreat for now. Although it would take time, he had no choice but to level up to a point where he could engage the boss. He mentally regretted not being able to speed up his leveling, as things could go faster if the monster quest activated, but he didn't even know the conditions for its appearance. On his way, he noticed a monster and pondered it was a goblin. He had previously completed quests involving goblins and the minotaur, but since then, no quests related to enemies had appeared, even if they had killed him at lower levels. He wondered if quests only appeared if he was killed by an opponent at his level or higher. Remembering that an orc should be in the neighboring town, he decided to test his hypothesis. Akira set off to find the orc, determined to confirm his theory. When he found the monster he was looking for, he carefully performed an analysis. The system displayed the data: an orc level 59 with 131 vitality, 157 muscular strength, 174 stamina, 147 speed, 50 magic power, and 40 luck. After some thought, Akira realized that these stats roughly matched his own. Now, according to his plan, the orc needed to kill him to activate the desired quest. He began to provoke the orc, taunting it to attack him. The orc struck, but it wasn't enough to kill him. Akira encouraged the monster, demanding it hit harder with full power. The orc repeated its attack, but Akira still felt it wasn't enough. He mentally chastised himself for having leveled up his body reinforcement too effectively, which now made his plan difficult to execute, as it had become too hard to die. The thought crossed his mind that the pain and fear of death remained unbearable despite multiple resurrections, but he was willing to endure it again and again if it meant sparing Nao from suffering. The system confirmed Akira's death and reported that the special skill resurrection had been successfully activated, allowing him to return to life. Afterward, he noticed that the quest had indeed appeared. The system announced the emergence of a quest related to the monster that had killed him previously, a D-class mission to defeat orcs. Akira realized that now was the time to start leveling up. After some time, the system noted the completion of the quest. The number of defeated orcs reached 50 out of 50. As a reward, Akira received plus 30 points for successfully completing the quest. Akira breathed a sigh of relief, realizing the quest was finally complete. He focused on the details and noted that for completing the quest and the level points gained, he had accumulated a total of 47 points, which he felt was quite sufficient for further strengthening. He also noticed that at some point his magic power stat had partially recovered, which was an important development. The system displayed Akira's updated status. His level reached 17. Vitality was 82, muscular strength rose to 182, stamina to 151, speed to 166, magic power reached 37, and luck increased to 56. He had 47 accumulated points available. Among his special abilities, the active skill Resurrection remained in his arsenal, along with a range of skills: Body Reinforcement at level 3, Analysis at level 1, Magic Circuit, Magic Power Recovery, Automatic Regeneration, Sprint, and Sixth Sense, all at level 1. Additionally, he had damage bonuses: plus 3% against goblins, plus 10% against wolves, plus 3% against plant-type monsters, and plus 5% against beast-like creatures. Akira pondered which skill to acquire first and decided to level up an existing one. After making his choice, the system confirmed that the automatic regeneration ability had been successfully upgraded to level 2. Akira bitterly noted that the physical pain from his fight with the Minotaur still lingered every time he came back to life after dying. Despite this, he decided to spend a full 30 points on improving this ability, understanding that he wouldn't be able to cope otherwise. He considered using the remaining 17 points to distribute among his stats or to buy a new skill that could help in the upcoming boss fight. He thought that if he invested points in the sprint skill, he could outrun the werewolf, but he also realized it wouldn't give him a decisive advantage. He needed a truly useful and effective skill. The system provided a description of a new ability: Titanic Strength at level 1, costing 15 points. This is an active skill that uses the owner's magical power to enhance muscular strength for 1 minute. The increased value is calculated based on current magical power, multiplied by the skill level and by 10. Akira analyzed that this skill was essentially similar to Sprint, but focused on muscular strength. He concluded that with this skill, he would be able to surpass the werewolf's endurance. Recalling that he had previously seen this ability for 10 points, he was surprised by the price change. He hypothesized that if he acquired skills dependent on magical power consumption, each subsequent similar skill would cost more. At this point, he decided it was time to analyze the werewolf's combat pattern, and for that, he needed to die by its paws one more time to activate a new quest. He felt his preparation was almost complete, and now much would depend on Nao's actions. The system confirmed Ichijo Akira's death. After resurrection, he found himself in his room and began training. He noted that now that the pain had completely disappeared, he felt good, and the increase in automatic regeneration had proven worthwhile. He was happily ready to move forward. Karub wanted to enter the room, but Akira met him in the hallway. He asked if Akira could move around yet. Akira responded by calling him by name. Karub then asked where he was going. Akira, not having time for lengthy explanations, promised only one thing: he would definitely defeat the boss. He said goodbye, adding that they would see each other again. Akira then went to Nao's room and warned her that he was opening the door. Akira informed her that he had completed all preparations and was now ready to go outside. However, Nao sadly said that it was impossible for her as she was no longer capable of fighting monsters. Akira assured her that it was fine and that her participation in the fight was not mandatory. He explained that the boss they were about to fight was a werewolf, a creature that moves on two legs. The main part of the fight would be between him and this boss, but he asked Nao to use a magical attack just once during the battle. After he killed the boss, this single attack would fulfill the condition of the quest to defeat the boss together. Nao asked again if she really needed to attack. Akira clarified that magic was only required once. He noted that although the wolf had subordinates, they had been sent out hunting and there were no other monsters nearby. He assured her that as soon as she performed the attack, she could immediately hide and he wouldn't let her die no matter what. He invited her to come outside one more time. Nao silently made her decision, then with difficulty said that she probably could if it was truly just once. Akira sincerely thanked her. They went outside. Akira mentally noted that monsters were still roaming the streets. He noticed Nao trembling with fear. He suggested they take a different path. Nao gratefully agreed. Akira thought that although this path might be longer, their main goal was to avoid encountering monsters as much as possible. They chose a different route, but a giant spider monster appeared in Nao's path. Nao tried to call out to Akira, but her fear was too overwhelming and her voice wouldn't obey her. She closed her eyes in a panic. Akira approached her and reassured her, telling her he was right there and would protect her at any second. He asked her to look forward and suggested they continue their journey together. Nao quietly thanked him and promised to try her best. Akira nodded in understanding. He mentally noted that if he couldn't defeat the boss this time, Nao would likely never recover from the experience. He couldn't let her die. Akira reminded himself that he had fought the werewolf many times and had already figured out a suitable strategy to defeat it. He was confident that if he remained calm, he could handle it. They continued moving and Akira pointed the way. A firm thought echoed in his mind: defeat was not an option, he would definitely win. Akira and Nao descended deeper into the dungeon to where the werewolf was to complete their mission. Before the fight, he turned to Nao, reminding her of the crucial condition for completing the script that they had discussed earlier: her participation in the attack. Nao, trembling with anxiety, nodded and confirmed that she remembered. She needed to land a successful magic attack, and if Akira could defeat the enemy afterward, the script would be considered complete. She assured him she would manage. Meanwhile, Akira mentally noted that in a few hours, a pack of wolves subservient to this boss would attack the hospital, and he needed to finish the fight before that happened. He signaled Nao to get ready, sensing the approaching danger. Nao reacted with surprise, realizing the enemy was already close. At that moment, the system registered a quest related to the monster that had killed Akira previously. It was a Class C quest, and its condition was the complete defeat of the werewolf. Nao, overcome with fear, recognized the creature that appeared as the very monster they were about to fight. Her mind raced with panic-filled thoughts. They had to fight this horror. Akira intended to fight this creature, which seemed almost impossible. Defeating it together felt like an unthinkable task. The werewolf suddenly lunged to attack, and only thanks to Akira's quick reaction was he able to block the blow at the last moment, saving Nao. He immediately turned to her, checking if she was hurt. Nao mentally noted that everything happened too fast. She hadn't even had time to understand what occurred and couldn't imagine how she would counter such attacks. At this moment, the system activated the sprint skill, granting Akira 60 seconds of enhanced speed. A swift battle began between Akira and the werewolf. Their movements were lightning fast, attacks followed one after another, and Akira continued to hold off the enemy, protecting Nao. When the right moment arrived, he gave Nao the command to act, expecting her to deliver the promised strike. However, Nao, overwhelmed by shock, only let out a choked sound in confusion. Her hands trembled, and as a result, she dropped her pistol. The werewolf took advantage of this, breaking free from Akira's grasp and immediately going on the offensive. Nao, falling to her knees, realized she couldn't fight. She mentally admitted her helplessness, her body wouldn't obey, and her will to fight had completely abandoned her. Meanwhile, the monster grabbed Akira, squeezing him in its paws. Akira concluded that Nao, in her current state, wouldn't be able to perform her part of the script, making the quest impossible under these conditions. He decided it would be wiser to abandon the script and instead focus on finding another boss he could defeat alone. Now, there was only one option left: defeat the werewolf by himself. The system activated the Titanic Strength skill, granting the user 60 seconds of effect. Akira gathered all his remaining strength, using both magic and muscle power, and furiously launched a powerful attack on the monster. He told his enemy that he would destroy it right here and now. Then, he delivered a second powerful blow, fully committing to the fight. In response, the werewolf showed an unexpected surge of vitality, indicating that the fight was far from over and the enemy had no intention of giving up. The werewolf suddenly vanished from sight as if it had completely dissolved into thin air, leaving only an intense silence. Akira froze, unable to even finish his sentence, as the enemy's disappearance was so swift it caught him off guard. At that moment, the werewolf uttered words confirming the activation of a skill. It was an associated attack, signaling a completely new combat tactic. It unleashed a lightning-fast series of blows, each possessing destructive power and speed never before seen. A thought full of shock and bewilderment flashed through Akira's mind. He couldn't understand what had happened or why his opponent had suddenly started moving so fast. The system then updated the boss's parameters. The werewolf had a level of 93, vitality 237, muscle strength 213, stamina 254, speed 512, magic power 70, and luck at 51. Akira mentally admitted that no matter how many times he had fought this creature, nothing like this had ever happened before. He began to analyze the words he had just heard and started to suspect that monsters might also be able to use special combat skills. The thought struck him that the werewolf might have changed tactics and was now targeting Nao. When Akira noticed the enemy rapidly heading towards Nao, he stood in its path, preventing it from advancing further. He made it clear that he wouldn't allow the wolf to take another step towards her, ordering it to stop and stay put. The werewolf attacked Akira again, and he barely managed to react. Internally, Akira resolved that he had no right to give up and was obligated to protect Nao at all costs. The wolf activated its associated attack once more, preparing to unleash another barrage of blows. Akira realized that in this fight, every maneuver was critical, and if he couldn't dodge the next attack, he would have no chance of winning. He decided to invest his remaining points into his magic power stat, which would allow him to act faster than his opponent. The system responded to his choice. The sprint skill was activated, with 60 seconds remaining on its duration. The Titanic Strength skill was also applied, also for 60 seconds. Immediately after, Akira lunged forward with incredible speed, using all his enhancements to attack the werewolf. He delivered a series of powerful blows, each landing precisely on target and inflicting significant damage. Akira mentally noted that his attacks had landed and dealt significant damage. He felt the enemy was on the brink, and one more push could be decisive. However, at that moment, the werewolf let out a loud and alarming sound. Akira instantly recognized the howl, and a wave of anxiety washed over him. He realized it wasn't just a regular cry, it was a call for backup. Soon, several black wolves emerged from the darkness, responding to the signal. Akira understood that the enemy had managed to summon reinforcements and now had support. The situation had become more complicated, and the threat to Nao had increased many times over. Meanwhile, Nao herself was paralyzed with fear. She couldn't move, completely frozen in terror, sitting in one spot with her ears and eyes covered. After some time, she opened her eyes and timidly asked if it was all over. However, her hopes were dashed. A three-headed black wolf appeared right in front of her, menacing and eerie, its appearance leaving no doubt of the mortal danger. Akira's inner voice, filled with anxiety and self-criticism, acknowledged that his decision to keep his distance from Nao to avoid dragging her into the fight had ultimately backfired. He realized there was no more time to delay. He needed to reach her immediately. He rushed towards Nao, overcoming obstacles, but a pack of black wolves was already hot on his heels, persistently pursuing him and giving him no chance to relax. Meanwhile, Nao, paralyzed by fear, was in a state of extreme stress. She uttered broken words, begging the enemy to retreat, but her voice trembled with terror. Standing before her was the terrifying three-headed black wolf, which immediately launched an attack. Just as the monster closed in, Akira, despite his own danger, lunged forward and took the powerful blow himself. But despite the pain, he managed to gather his strength and deliver a decisive strike, destroying the three-headed wolf and saving Nao from mortal danger. Nao cried out when she saw him, her voice filled with fright and concern. She rushed to him, noticing his injured body. Akira, breathing heavily, reassured her, trying to show that everything was under control. He comforted her, saying that everything was fine even despite his wounds. Now, looking at him, noticed with alarm that his body was covered in injuries. However, Akira, feigning a calm smile, replied that it wasn't so bad and such wounds were no cause for concern. He assured her that he would finish everything himself, and she just needed to hide and stay safe. At that moment, despair mixed with admiration flooded Nao's heart. She couldn't help but think that Akira had already done too much and shouldn't suffer anymore. She was shocked that he was even still standing after everything he had endured. She didn't understand where he found such inner strength, not only to fight but also to maintain a kind smile on his face, even in such moments. Now involuntarily recalled a moment from the past. Back then, she found herself in a difficult situation at school. She was being harassed by several boys, and it was Akira who intervened to protect her. He took some heavy hits, but despite the pain, he still smiled and said he was fine. That image flashed vividly in her mind. While Nao was lost in her memories, Akira didn't stop fighting. He kept fending off the black wolves, doing everything he could to protect her. He pushed himself to the limit, completely immersed in the battle. Watching him, Nao realized the gravity of the situation. She mentally acknowledged that no matter how many wounds he sustained, Akira kept fighting with all his might, doing everything possible for her. Meanwhile, she felt helpless, realizing that all she had done so far was cry. This ignited a new resolve within her. She reminded herself that she had promised to support Akira. Now, she couldn't afford to hesitate any longer. In this world, which felt like a living hell, she decided to stay by his side, move forward with him, and not back down. Clenching her teeth, Nao got up, firmly took the gun in her hands, and aimed it at the monsters. She fired a shot, damaging the enemies, thus participating in the battle for the first time since it began. Akira noticed her action with surprise and relief. His voice was full of encouragement and approval. Nao, looking him firmly in the eyes, said that everything was truly fine now. She declared that they would defeat the enemy together, just as they should have from the start. Akira raised Nao's hand as if giving a signal and immediately started running to draw attention to himself and change the tide of the battle. During this time, Nao cast a spell, activating a magical skill called Impact Arrow to use it as a weapon against the approaching threat. Then she decisively blocked the path of the black wolves, taking a strategic position so they couldn't pass. From outside, Nao, observing the situation, turned to Akira and expressed concern, trying to ascertain if her comrade was okay and still holding on. Akira confirmed that his condition remained satisfactory despite the intensity of the fight. Nao, analyzing the situation, expressed her opinion that even if they managed to defeat the current opponent, it wouldn't signify a final victory overall. Akira agreed with this observation, explaining that he understood his speed increased due to a certain skill, but after activating a move called Sprint, his speed decreased again. In his thoughts, Akira noted that if the fight continued at the same pace and without changes in strategy, defeat would soon become inevitable. Aloud, he expressed despair and bewilderment about how they could possibly defeat such a powerful opponent. Nao suggested there was only one possible tactical plan and added that if everything went as she expected, then they would indeed have a chance at victory, albeit with great risk to Akira. Akira was intrigued and wanted to know the exact essence of the proposed strategy. Nao explained that the power of the impact arrows significantly increased as her magical power gradually accumulated, and that if she invested her remaining 7 points into magic and then used all the accumulated energy, she could achieve maximum firepower. Akira listened carefully and agreed that such an approach had the potential for success, then asked how much time was left until she reached full combat readiness. Now, checking her internal stats, reported that it would take approximately 3 minutes to accumulate all the power, but she added that during this time, she wouldn't be able to move even slightly, as all her focus would be directed towards accumulating energy. Akira's internal reflections told him that in such a case, he would have to engage the werewolf within Nao's firing range. After these conclusions, he affirmatively stated that he would act according to the proposed strategy and take on the task of distracting the enemy forces. Nao anxiously asked if Akira was confident in his abilities, as in his exhausted state, he would have to face an entire pack of enemies alone, including the werewolf, while waiting for her to accumulate magical energy, knowing that he could die at any moment. Akira, with a firm voice, expressed his complete trust in Nao and asked her to also believe in him as a comrade in arms. Nao, impressed by his words, quietly uttered Akira's name, realizing the gravity of the moment. The next second, the werewolf and his pack emerged from the ruins, ready to attack. Noticing this, Akira declared with determination that it was time to end this fight. He rushed into battle, taking the first blow. Akira calculated in his mind that there was a minute and a half left until Nao's impact arrow reached its maximum power, and he promised himself he would withstand any assault until then. At that moment, the black wolves began to surround Akira from all sides, tightening the circle around him. The werewolf chose its moment and decided to attack Akira personally. The encirclement became critical. The wolves were practically on top of Akira. He tried to say something but didn't get the chance because the werewolf activated a skill, boosting its durability. Instantly, the beast unleashed an attack not only on Akira but also directed its entire pack at him, subjecting the fighter to multiple blows. Akira mentally realized that the werewolf had unleashed its full power along with its ferocious pack. Despite the brutal onslaught, Akira managed to stay alive, but he sustained injuries from the enemy's claws. Now witnessing this, cried out Akira's name, filled with alarm. In her mind, she kept her aim on the enemy, but she knew that if she fired right now, it wouldn't be enough to defeat the werewolf. She felt that if she decided to attack prematurely, all the efforts made up to that point, including Akira's heroism, would be in vain. However, Akira's words about trust resurfaced in Nao's mind. When the werewolf delivered another blow, Akira cried out in pain, not hiding his suffering. The enemy didn't stop and continued its fierce attacks. With his last ounce of strength, Akira stated that their combined attack was not yet complete and entrusted the conclusion of the battle to Nao. She accepted this as a mission and promised to see it through. Nao attacked the werewolf with all her accumulated power. The enemy began to gradually fade away, losing its form under the magical attack. Silence fell over the battlefield, signaling the end of the fight. Akira, relieved, said he always knew how strong and reliable his boss was. The system registered the successful completion of the C-class quest called Werewolf. The corresponding reward was granted, including an additional 50 points. The system also confirmed that the enemy was a monster boss, and the progress of the global reversal had slowed down thanks to their victory. After the intense battle, Akira, breathing heavily, admitted that they had accomplished the task, even though it turned out to be extremely difficult. He added that he now had the chance to finally free Nao from the eternal cycle of reincarnation. At this moment, the system confirmed the progress of the script related to Nanase Nao, indicating that the number of bosses defeated with her had reached 1 out of 1 required. The system also registered the successful completion of Nanase Nao's script while accompanied by Akira and announced the issuance of a reward. As this reward, Nao received a special skill called Eternal Sacred Fire, as well as 1 additional stat point. Akira's internal thoughts flared with surprise and disbelief, as he couldn't understand why Nao had received such a large number of points, more than he had, and it seemed truly awesome to him. He concluded that such rewards are indeed part of completing scripts, which means that if they purposefully tackle them, they can create people capable of fighting the monsters appearing in this world. At that moment, Nao called out to Akira, clearly concerned about his condition. He confirmed that everything had happened exactly as she had said earlier, and noted that no one could have imagined such power beforehand. Nao replied that she wasn't taking credit at all because, according to her, she was only getting in the way and all of this was possible solely thanks to Akira's actions. She then suggested he get some rest. Akira assured her that he was fine, though he admitted his right arm was broken, but thanks to automatic regeneration, he would recover soon. He added that they should leave this place immediately before new monsters appeared. Nao agreed but warned Akira not to overexert himself or torment his body unnecessarily. Akira sincerely thanked Nao for her help. Now with a chuckle, confessed that she thought he was really cool. However, stumbling, Akira unexpectedly fell right onto Nao, invading her personal space. He immediately apologized, explaining that it happened by accident and he had no ill intentions whatsoever. Nao at that moment aimed her sights at him. Akira, flustered, began to explain himself, calling her by name and trying to understand her actions, but received no answer. Later, in a calmer setting, Nao helped Akira treat his wounds. He complained that she was doing it too roughly and asked for a little more gentleness. Nao, in response, called Akira a fussy child and noted that the bleeding had been temporarily stopped. Akira, sensing the atmosphere, cautiously asked if she was still angry with him for what happened. Nao explained that she wasn't angry at all, just a little scared at that moment, and added that such situations require the right atmosphere. Akira, deep in thought, didn't quite understand what she meant, pondering this atmosphere. Then he shifted his attention to a more important topic, expressing a desire to discuss the text that appeared after the script was completed. Nao, surprised, clarified if he was referring to the eternal sacred fire. Akira confirmed that this specific skill was awarded for successfully completing the script and reminded Nao that she also received special points along with it. Nao checked her information and confirmed that she indeed had a new skill and 100 points, which made her genuinely happy, as she couldn't believe she had received such a reward. Akira asked if she had read the description of the new skill. Nao realized she hadn't yet but promised to look at it now, though she admitted she felt like she didn't fully understand its essence. The system then provided the description. Eternal Sacred Fire is a passive skill whose duration depends on the thoughts of its owner. While the skill is active, its owner avoids death from any fatal wound. Akira concluded in his thoughts that the skill's owner becomes immune to fatal attacks for the entire duration of its activation. Now, lost in thought, tried to figure out how best to use such power, as she now faced an important choice. Akira chuckled, noting that she seemed to be hesitating. Now confirmed that the number of points received was too high and they couldn't be reallocated, so each investment needed careful consideration. Akira pointed out that automatic regeneration should be the first priority as there was no in-game recovery skill. Now completely agreed. Akira, thinking to himself, recalled that he also had points, rewards from the werewolf quest and level-up points, totaling 62. He wondered whether he should spend these points on acquiring new skills or invest them in leveling up existing ones. They both pondered together, verbalizing that the choice was indeed difficult. Eventually, Akira made a decision. The system confirmed the acquisition of 3 skills: Magic Circuit Level 2, Expertise Level 3, and Analysis Level 3. Akira began analyzing Magic Circuit Level 2 in his thoughts and realized that restoring 1 unit of magical power at Level 1 now took 1 day, and leveling up the skill was indeed justified, as Sprint and Titanic Strength skills required magical energy expenditure. Next, he moved on to analyzing Expertise Level 3, which now allowed him to learn not only the impact force of a weapon but also more specific characteristics. He also understood that further leveling up was impossible, and level 3 was the maximum. He noted the same regarding the analysis skill. Finally, he decided to immediately test the effect of expertise and, to his surprise, discovered a previously unknown magical element that he was seeing for the first time. The system provided data on a weapon called the Ferocious Bull's Cleaver. This item had usage recommendations and increased muscular strength by 80 units, while also providing an additional 75 units of impact force. Its durability was 37, but the weapon had no additional actions. The cleaver's condition was noted as defective, and its magical element content was only 3%. Akira mentally concluded that this weapon was indeed defective, but despite that, it was sufficient for his current situation. He also noted that the Analysis Level 3 skill was extremely necessary because it allowed him to understand in advance what skills a boss possessed and when they intended to use them. This ability would enable him to act without panic and make informed decisions. He noted with satisfaction that now, after raising the analysis level to its maximum possible value, a new skill became available to him, Analysis Block, which he believed was not acutely necessary yet but might be useful in the future. The system provided the characteristics of this new skill. Analysis Block Level 1 is passive and can prevent the effect of analysis that an opponent might use. The amount of information that can be hidden from the enemy depends on the skill's level. The system asked if he wished to acquire analysis block level 1. At this moment, Akira mentally apologized to Nao as he decided to use analysis on her. The system displayed information about Nao's current status. Her level was 40, vitality was 42 units, muscular strength 83, stamina 81, speed 82, and magical power reached 114 units. She had no points for allocation. The individual information section stated that she was a human from the real world, and the coefficient of magical elements in her body was 0. Magical crystals, both inside and outside her body, were absent. Her skill list included Eternal Sacred Fire, Body Reinforcement Level 2, Magic Circuit Level 2, Automatic Regeneration Level 2, and Basic Magic Level 3. Akira was astonished by what he saw. He noted that Nao had reached level 40, acquired automatic regeneration, and leveled up all her abilities. His attention was again drawn to the mention of a magical element, as well as strange mentions of some crystals, the meaning of which remained unclear to him. He was also surprised that Nao's magical power exceeded 100 units, which made her strength quite impressive even in a normal situation. He had a feeling that Nao might now even be stronger than him. Meanwhile, Nao, noticing his actions, turned to him, assuming he had used analysis on her again and was likely looking at her stats. Akira immediately began to make excuses, claiming he had no such intentions and wasn't even thinking about it, asking Nao not to worry. Nao, with some relief, accepted his words and agreed that everything was fine. Akira felt in his thoughts that she seemed to be downcast but couldn't understand why. He cautiously commented on the situation, trying to find out what exactly bothered her. Nao blushed, lowered her gaze, and said that nothing had happened and she wouldn't explain anything to him, especially if he couldn't guess the reasons himself. Akira anxiously retorted that he hadn't said anything of the sort and was not indifferent to her at all. Blushing, he struggled to say that he considered her a very important and dear person in his life. Hearing this confession, Nao, with anticipation, asked if that was all. Akira was surprised by her reaction. Nao repeated her thought, as if insisting on further revelations. At this tense moment, a man's voice unexpectedly broke the silence, commenting with interest that the situation was becoming quite exciting, and he presumed the next logical step might be a kiss. Akira and Nao were stunned by the man's sudden appearance and didn't understand where he came from. The man quickly apologized for his unexpected intrusion, explaining that he had been trying to get their attention for a long time but couldn't find the right moment to start a conversation. He added that they shouldn't see him as suspicious and introduced himself as Alan. Then, he politely offered them one thing: to become his companions. Akira activated his analysis skill to learn more about this unexpected newcomer. The system provided information about him. Name: Alan Smith, level 21. His stats were as follows: vitality 42, muscular strength 53, stamina 54, speed 41, luck 15. The origin section indicated he was a human from the real world. The magical element coefficient in his body was 0%. His current physical condition was normal. He only possessed one skill, body reinforcement level 1. Akira mentally noted that Alan only had one skill and wondered about the man's intentions in approaching them. However, what annoyed Akira most was that Alan had interrupted a moment that was important and possibly very personal between him and Nao. Nao was the first to speak, deciding to clarify the situation, and asked what exactly he meant by offering to become companions. Alan chuckled and replied that if they accepted his offer, something good would surely come their way, and he even promised to give them his autograph. Akira tried to read the autograph but found it almost impossible to decipher the writing due to the many smudges on the paper. Alan, as if expecting such a reaction, continued in the same vein, suggesting that an autograph wouldn't be enough and promised to treat them to alcohol, which he claimed he could make himself if they visited his base. Nao showed interest and asked what kind of alcohol he was offering. Hearing this, Akira quickly intervened, apologizing to Alan, and firmly stated that they had to decline his offer because they didn't trust him enough, and his behavior raised too many suspicions. Alan took this without offense, acknowledged the fairness of the remark, and promised to reveal his truth. He knelt down and bowed deeply, asking for their help in finding someone. Nao, surprised, asked if he was really talking about finding someone. Akira cautiously added why they, specifically, should be involved in this search. Alan confessed that he had witnessed them defeat a werewolf and admitted that he was much weaker compared to them. He explained that he couldn't protect the girl who was a friend of his benefactor, a person who had helped him when he was lost and wandering aimlessly on his own. Now, he wanted to repay him and asked them to join the search. Akira reminded him that in their current state, even moving was difficult. Alan offered a compromise. They had a girl with a healing skill, and he proposed helping to heal their wounds in exchange for their assistance in the search. Akira clarified if he meant the automatic regeneration skill. Alan assured him that he was talking about a different ability that could quickly heal, for example, his broken arm. Now turned to Akira, wondering aloud if they could trust this man, as his behavior remained suspicious. Akira admitted he couldn't give a definitive answer. Internally, Akira reasoned that if Alan's words turned out to be true, they could significantly save time needed for natural recovery from their injuries. Suspicions were certainly present, but the potential benefit also looked convincing. Making a decision, he stated that they agreed to help find the person. Alan reacted with enthusiasm and expressed genuine joy. Now, with some apprehension, turned to Akira, reminding him that if all of this turned out to be a trap, the consequences could be severe. Akira, trying to calm her down, assured her that everything would be fine and added that if things didn't go as planned, he would ask her to shoot. Alan, relieved to hear her agreement, promised to immediately take them to his base. Sometime later, Alan proudly presented his base, inviting them to make themselves at home and relax. He informed them that this was the place he had mentioned earlier. He also spoke about the girl they were supposed to meet, noting that she was very naive and kind. Approaching her, he tried to wake her up and called her name, telling her he had brought reliable helpers. The girl named Ayaka slowly regained consciousness and in a sleepy voice asked who exactly he had brought. The system displayed data about a girl named Ayaka Hanyagi, who was at level 29. Her main parameters were as follows. Vitality was 31 units, muscular strength 60, endurance 60, speed also 60, magical power 21, and luck 32 units. She had no free points to allocate. The information section stated that she was a human from the real world, and her body lacked a magical element coefficient. No magical crystals were observed either inside or outside her body. Her body condition remained normal. Her skill list included Sacred Technique, Body Reinforcement Level 2, and Magic Circuit Level 1. Akira noted to himself that the level of Sacred Technique wasn't displayed, which most likely meant this skill was special, possibly even unique. Besides that, he noticed that the girl herself seemed quite attractive to him, and perhaps she even matched his taste. Alan, observing Akira's expression, drew his own conclusion and said with irony that he was probably wondering if Ayaka would reciprocate if he suddenly proposed a romantic relationship. Akira, not hiding his annoyance, suggested Alan take a punch. Now intervened to stop Akira, noting that in his anger he could really hurt him. Ayaka, looking around, asked who all these people were. Alan introduced them as valuable helpers and added that Nao was the one who defeated the werewolf and her combat power had impressed him. Nao blushed and immediately corrected him, stating that Akira had actually done everything. Ayaka, hearing the mention of the werewolf, looked at Nao in surprise and said, astonished, that she hadn't expected such a feat to be accomplished by this lady. Nao immediately reacted with indignation, noting that addressing her that way was too rude. Ayaka, without thinking, explained that sometimes words slip out before she can think and asked her not to take it too personally. She added that despite her age, one can live well even in their late 20s, though she admitted that her chest tends to attract too much attention. Alan chuckled, confirming that this was precisely why he called her simple-minded. Akira, in turn, remarked that her simple-mindedness might have even gone too far. Once the atmosphere lightened up a bit, Alan suggested everyone have a drink to properly get acquainted. Nao agreed, asking for a drink with ice. Ayaka then wanted to find out exactly what the guy's demands were, because, according to her, no one offers help for free. Akira honestly explained that Alan had told them about her healing ability, and they agreed to help on the condition that she would heal their wounds. Ayaka reacted sharply, turning to Alan and expressing her displeasure that he had revealed her abilities to strangers. Alan justified himself by saying that without working together, it would have been difficult to figure out what to do anyway. Ayaka, acknowledging his point, asked him not to blab about her skills to everyone she meets in the future. Akira noted to himself that she had a rather difficult personality and that she and Nao were likely completely incompatible. He had doubts about how their interaction would unfold. Ayaka, not wanting to drag things out, demanded to see his hand. Akira, slightly flustered, extended it as she asked. The girl strictly ordered him not to move. Akira watched in awe as his wound began to close right before his eyes. Ayaka warned him not to consider her omnipotent, as the time required for complete healing could vary depending on the severity of the damage. Sometimes wounds cannot be healed in a single attempt. Furthermore, her ability has limitations. Akira assumed she was referring to the consumption of magical power. Ayaka explained that the limit was the number of times the skill could be used per day, and also added that the skill does not eliminate fatigue but only heals physical damage. Akira thanked her, noting that even that was already enough. Ayaka replied that she wasn't doing it for anyone else but primarily for herself. Akira then noticed a photograph on her phone. Ayaka reacted sharply, telling him not to pry. Akira apologized and asked if the person in the photo was related to her father. Meanwhile, Nao, at the bar counter, ordered another drink. Alan commented at this time that everything was going quite well. Ayaka confirmed that the person in the photo was indeed her father. However, she ironically remarked that as a dad, he was completely hopeless and utterly useless. Akira cautiously asked if he had disappeared. Ayaka replied that it was a minor detail, as they used to constantly argue over trivial things even before the world changed. She recalled her father scolding her for dyeing her hair, considering it risky and warning her it could lead to trouble. Ayaka, in turn, told him to leave her alone, emphasizing that she was already 18 and had the right to make her own choices. After that, she confessed that she only realized the gravity of the situation when chaos erupted in the world due to monsters, and they hadn't seen each other since. Akira acknowledged that if her father was still alive, there might be a chance for them to reunite. Ayaka stated that she didn't really consider it that important, but admitted that despite everything, he was her only remaining relative. Even though he was stubborn, made her suffer from the smell of his feet around the house, annoyed her with his drinking, and had a habit of taking long baths, he was still her silly but beloved father. She confessed that she wanted to find him to properly apologize. Akira, moved by what he heard, promised himself he would do everything he could to help. He said aloud that he heard her and assured her they would definitely find her father. At that moment, Nao, touched, grabbed Ayaka's hand and expressed her sympathy, saying that Ayaka must have suffered a lot but still tried her best. She suggested they combine their efforts to definitely find her father. Akira, a little confused, confirmed that's exactly what they would do. Ayaka, with childlike sincerity, thanked Nao, calling her auntie. Nao immediately pulled out her gun. Akira, noticing this, called her name with concern. Nao, looking serious, stated that she was not an old lady at all, as she was only 27 years old. Alan, realizing their squad was about to set off to find Ayaka's father, suggested they discuss a plan for covering the city area to act in an organized and efficient manner. Akira agreed with the proposal, giving a short nod. Alan continued, explaining that Ayaka's family home was located approximately 20 kilometers from their current position. He expressed his opinion that actively searching within this zone would likely lead them to traces of her father. He then moved on to discuss the monsters depicted in the sketches, noting that some of them looked quite threatening. Akira, examining the drawings, wondered to himself if Alan had truly created such images. Alan clarified that not only did he lack information about the boss's locations, but he had also never encountered them himself. He was confident that such creatures existed somewhere, but he didn't know their specific whereabouts. He also noted that they likely wouldn't have problems with common monsters like mantises or chameleons. However, his tone changed when he mentioned the sky fish. He explained that these creatures posed a particular danger. When a sky fish is on the verge of death, it emits a piercing cry, summoning its brethren. Once a connection is established, the character finds themselves surrounded by many of these creatures. Akira admitted to himself that despite the risk, such creatures could be very useful for rapid leveling up. He pondered whether it was worth taking the chance. Alan emphasized that danger indeed existed, but given their shared goal of finding Ayaka's father, maximum cohesion was essential. He reminded them that they were comrades and each of them should be ready to cover the other's back. Only then could they survive and achieve their goal, by fighting side by side. Afterward, the squad headed outside. Alan, tired, hid behind cover, sighing with relief that it seemed like they could finally catch their breath. Ayaka remarked with slight sarcasm that this was the real Alan. He didn't argue, admitting that despite his appearance, he didn't possess great physical strength. Akira, observing the scene, noted to himself that he was genuinely pleased by the fact that these two were able to stay positive and alive. However, his inner unease persisted, and his thoughts revolved around something else, something more important. Now noticed Akira's tension and asked what was wrong. He explained that thanks to his increased analysis level, he was able to reanalyze the monsters. System provided new information. The killer mantis, a level 20 monster with stats of 25 for vitality, 31 for muscle strength, 19 for endurance, 21 for speed, 9 for magic power, and 10 for luck. The description stated that these creatures appeared in a dungeon located in a forgotten empty village and belonged to the insect class order Mantodia. The magical element coefficient in their bodies was 5%, and there were no magic crystals in their bodies. Akira concluded that these monsters inhabited a place called the Forgotten Empty Village Dungeon. Nao, surprised, expressed her admiration, saying it truly resembled dungeons from games and manga. Akira confirmed that everything pointed to that, adding that they now had a clear understanding of where these creatures appeared. Alan, intrigued, wondered about magical elements, assuming he might have them too. Akira confirmed that he indeed did, unlike Nao, whose coefficient was 0. Ayaka interrupted them at that moment, calling out demandingly for them to stop chatting and immediately take cover because the enemy was approaching. Akira clarified who she meant. Ayaka pointed to the strange sounds everyone was hearing and reported that those were creatures they definitely shouldn't engage in combat with. The system provided information about the creature. A skyfish level 6 with vitality 7, muscle strength 9, stamina 15, speed 20, magic power 1, and luck 20. These creatures also inhabit the dungeon of the Forgotten Empty Village, belong to the evil spirit class, and are winged. The magical element coefficient was 2% and no crystals were observed inside or outside its body. Its body condition remained normal. One of its skills was Call, level 1. Akira mentally noted that this seemed to be the skyfish they were looking for. At that moment, a bird appeared directly from the sky and began to snatch up the skyfish. Nao commented in surprise that monsters apparently devour each other. Ayaka explained that these creatures don't distinguish between allies and enemies. The skyfish itself doesn't possess much power. Akira suddenly noticed they were hiding among weeds and wondered how that was possible since they were inside a building. Ayaka pointed out that the monster's kin were already gathering and the situation could become critical if they noticed them. Alan reassured everyone, saying that these monsters have poor eyesight and if they waited it out, they wouldn't be seen. However, one of the skyfish appeared right next to them. Alan was scared, but Akira reacted quickly and struck the creature. Ayaka screamed, expressing shock at the enemy's sudden appearance, and accused Alan of potentially attracting others by yelling. Akira retorted that she wasn't any quieter. Ayaka, not to be outdone, accused Akira of the same. Alan, realizing his mistake, apologized, saying he might have indeed attracted the enemy's attention. Now suggested they run. Akira pointed out that with so many enemies, escaping would be difficult. He realized that their only option was to fight. However, a nagging fear lingered deep inside him. Would they survive this battle and remain alive under such a fierce enemy onslaught? At that moment, Ayaka drove up in a car and demanded that everyone get in immediately. Akira was surprised where she got a vehicle. Ayaka explained that someone had simply abandoned it, and luckily there was still gas. She urged everyone to jump in or death was inevitable. Akira asked if she knew how to drive. Ayaka confidently replied that she had recently gotten her driver's license. Now, firing at the monsters, reported that shooting wasn't helping as there were only more of them. Alan noted that at this rate, they would definitely be caught. Ayaka announced that there was a heavy axe in the trunk, and if they threw it out, their speed would increase. Akira refused to part with the weapon. He cursed mentally, realizing that even inside buildings, it was now impossible to feel safe. Suddenly, a cliff appeared ahead. Akira exclaimed that they were surrounded. Everything seemed hopeless from all sides. Ayaka, with a stone-cold expression, said that if you doubt something, move forward. Akira yelled, asking if she was joking, but Ayaka didn't stop and drove the car down the cliff. After the fall, Akira was the first to regain consciousness and asked if everyone was okay. Nao replied that they could say so. Ayaka asked about their pursuers. Akira looked back and realized that the pursuers had lost their trail. However, an unsettling thought persistently echoed in his mind. The reason they stopped the chase remained unclear. Their abandonment of the hunt seemed strange and unnatural, as if something more significant was hidden behind it. He suggested they look around, but realized there was nothing for them to do there. Akira checked the car and called out to the others, but then realized they weren't listening. Now, deep in thought, said that they had been in the city, hadn't they? Akira, hearing this, became wary, not understanding what she was getting at. He looked around and everything had changed. The city seemed to be filling up with new buildings. Ayaka noticed strange shapes and saw that the buildings were starting to merge, with private homes mixing with high-rises. Akira mentally connected the dots: private homes, a forgotten empty village, a dungeon, and some kind of reversal coefficient. Alan noticed that Akira seemed to have realized something. Akira confirmed his suspicion that the global reversal rate not only boosts monsters, but also indicates the gradual replacement of the old world with a new one. Nao accepted this as truth and concluded that the dungeon called the Forgotten Empty Village was destroying the current city. Aka suddenly screamed and pointed at something strange. A black shadow appeared on the buildings, only to vanish instantly. Akira realized the situation had become dangerous and urged everyone to run immediately. However, the black shadow reappeared right next to him. Akira was shocked, noting in his mind that the enemy had covered a colossal distance in just an instant, as if disappearing from one place and reappearing in another. Without wasting any time, the enemy launched a swift attack. Akira instantly grabbed his weapon and blocked the enemy's assault. He urgently yelled at Ayaka to step on the pedal and speed up the car. Completely bewildered, he voiced his despair aloud, trying to figure out their next move as the situation grew more critical. Now, keeping her cool, stated that the creature was chasing them and the main thing now was to get out of its territory. Alan added that, in his opinion, they were starting to move further away from Ayaka's home again. Hearing this, Akira irritably exclaimed that now was definitely not the time for such remarks. Ayaka, in a panic, began to lose hope and desperately muttered that all was lost and they were doomed to die. Akira, despite everything happening, focused and declared that he intended to give his all to protect everyone from the enemy's attacks and asked Nao to support him in this. Nao confidently confirmed that she was ready to help. Alan, in his usual manner, said he would calmly pray for their successful escape. Akira, a little embarrassed, agreed with this idea. System displayed information about a new opponent. Before them stood a boss, Dullahan the Knight, who had reached level 86. His parameters were terrifying. Vitality was 257, muscular strength was 278, endurance was 233, speed was 212, magic power was 170, and luck was 11. This monster belonged to the demi-human class, a type of ghost, and appeared in a dungeon called the Forgot Empty Village. 14% of its body contained magical elements. There were no magic crystals inside its body, but they were present outside, with a small crystallization noted on its chest. The boss's arsenal included skills, level 1 swordsmanship, level 1 composite technique, and level 1 open magic. Akira, analyzing the parameters, realized that this opponent was significantly stronger than the werewolf. The total numerical value of its characteristics surpassed anything he had encountered before, and even the slightest mistake could cost them their lives. He prepared for battle and issued a challenge, inviting the enemy to attack. Gathering his will, he landed several blows with his weapon, but the opponent was not stopped. All attacks had no noticeable effect. Now taking aim, fired a spell at him, a shock arrow. Alan, watching the fight, expressed admiration and said that such actions were to be expected from those who had recently managed to defeat a werewolf. Aka, stunned by what was happening, exclaimed that their strength was impressive and asked if they had managed to defeat the enemy. Now explained that the final victory had not yet been achieved, but they had gained the necessary distance. Akira, feeling relieved, exclaimed with admiration that it was awesome. Internally, he pondered how significantly his power had increased after leveling up his magical strength. Now he understood the true power of exceeding 100 units. He suggested to Nao that they continue in the same vein. Nao affirmed, repeating her attack, confirming her resolve. Ayaka watched the fight and enthusiastically commented that they were really getting the upper hand against the boss monster. She then turned to Nao with concern, trying to ascertain her condition. Nao replied with forced confidence that she was fine. Akira, observing her, realized that her strength was already at its limit. He understood that as the power of spells increased, the total number of available attacks decreased. Nevertheless, it was thanks to these attacks that they managed to increase their distance. He firmly told himself that even if he had to go it alone, he would manage. The main thing was to get out of the enemy's territory. However, the next moment, the vehicle and everyone inside it were thrown into the air along with the top of the chassis. Akira wondered in confusion what had happened. He couldn't understand if they had fallen or why it had happened. His mind was filled with worry for his companions. Before his eyes, the burning vehicle appeared. His heart clenched as he began to call out to his friends, Nao, Ayaka, Alan. He noticed Nao's motionless body and, overcome with despair, he rushed towards her, shouting her name. Akira, his voice trembling, begged her to hold on, refusing to accept what was happening as reality. His mind frantically searched for an explanation. This shouldn't have happened. Everything had gone wrong, not as he had hoped. He desperately called out to Ayaka, called out to Alan, hoping someone would answer, someone would help. But instead, behind him, as if from the darkness, the enemy silently appeared. The system coldly registered, fourth death confirmed. Akira regained consciousness after his death, realizing he had been resurrected. Alan, seeing his pensive face, approached and expressed concern, noting that Akira seemed to be deep in thought. Ayaka didn't miss the chance to scold Alan, accusing him of hiding somewhere the whole time again. Alan, in his defense, merely shrugged and said that despite his appearance, he couldn't boast about his strength. Akira mentally tried to analyze the situation. He realized that he had indeed died at the hands of Dullahan. He remembered how the vehicle had fallen, and when he woke up, it was already burning. Nao was nearby at that moment, and in that vulnerable instant, the enemy delivered a fatal blow. Akira wondered if it was an explosion in the vehicle or a special type of boss attack. He also noted that the resurrection point had changed again, and now he could confirm that the return location updates after defeating each boss. With these thoughts, he concluded that they needed to leave as quickly as possible. Akira announced to the others that it was dangerous to stay here and urged everyone to leave the area. Ayaka reacted with surprise, not understanding why he had suddenly spoken so sharply. Akira explained that a swarm of skyfish was approaching from the back of the building, and if they stayed here, they would definitely be attacked. Ayaka, listening closely, confirmed that she could indeed hear the characteristic sounds of these creatures, albeit faintly. Alan praised Akira's intuition, calling it astonishing. Ayaka suggested using a nearby vehicle to get to her house faster, as the distance was still considerable. She noticed the key was already in the ignition and hoped the vehicle would start. Akira flatly stated that they couldn't use the car. Ayaka was a bit taken aback by his tone and asked him not to yell. Akira immediately apologized, realizing he had been too harsh. Nao supported him, pointing out that if an enemy attacked while they were in the car, it would be much harder to fight back. Alan agreed, saying it was hard to argue with that, and suggested they continue on foot. Akira apologized again for his behavior. Nao said it was fine, then moved on to an important topic, asking if he had truly returned after dying again. Akira confirmed that was indeed the case. Nao concluded that the mysterious accident and the encounter with Dullahan were connected, noting it happened almost immediately after they defeated the werewolf. Akira promised to choose the safest route to avoid an unexpected encounter with that enemy and asked everyone to be extremely vigilant. Nao promised to be careful. Akira thought to himself that if a battle started, someone might die. He also realized that many things about his last death remained unclear, which only gave him a bad feeling. Now, feeling the tension, remarked that constant monster skirmishes had slowed their progress too much. Ayaka, hearing this, reminded them that she had suggested taking the car from the beginning. She complained about feeling sticky after the last fight and expressed a desire to wash it all off. Akira asked how much further they had to go. Ayaka estimated their pace and said at their current speed, it would take another 5 or 6 hours. Akira suggested they rest for a bit. Alan supported him, saying their master was clearly exhausted. Ayaka proposed stopping at a nearby hot spring. She explained that after all these battles, she really wanted to wash off all the dirt and grime and asked Nao for her consent. Nao agreed that it would be a good idea. Akira asked worriedly if there was hot water there. Ayaka suggested they not waste time and go check if the water was indeed hot. It would solve 2 problems at once. Akira countered that if monsters attacked them while they were bathing, the situation could get out of control. Ayaka confidently replied that in that case she would scream and the others would just need to stay alert. Later, when the girls were already in the spring, Nao noted that the water was indeed hot. Ayaka exclaimed with relief that she felt like she had been resurrected. Nao was surprised that they could find access to hot water in such conditions. Ayaka asked if the others were keeping an eye on their surroundings. Alan assured her that everything was clear, but then teased Akira, saying he looked like he was trying to peek. Akira flatly denied it and asked him not to spread rumors. Alan changed the subject, remarking that the nights in this country were getting colder. Akira, intrigued, asked where he was from. Alan admitted he was from America. Akira noted that Americans were known for their energy. Ayaka turned to Nao, expressing admiration for her impact arrow and asked if she could use other magic. Nao replied that she could, but her other magic wasn't meant for combat. Ayaka insisted she wanted to see what kind of magic it was. Nao, slightly embarrassed, cast a spell and demonstrated creative water. She explained that it was magic that created water. Ayaka excitedly asked if it was drinkable. Nao replied that she wasn't sure and suggested asking Akira to analyze it later. Ayaka, inspired, declared that she should learn magic too and asked about other methods. Nao began to explain. Meanwhile, Akira pondered whether he should continue searching for Ayaka's father. He didn't want to expose Nao to new deadly risks and decided he needed to be by her side to protect her. Alan, observing the interaction between the girls, noted that they were gradually getting along. He added that while Ayaka could be sharp, she was still a sweet girl. Akira agreed, admitting she certainly had a lot of spunk. Alan asked if his paternal instincts were kicking in as she seemed to demand protection. Akira said not to that extent. He then asked why Alan was helping Ayaka. Alan said it was a long story worthy of a 2-volume biography, but at Akira's request, he agreed to tell it briefly. He recounted that he had a daughter. As a teenager, she was rebellious and they often argued. However, he loved her immensely. She was everything to him, but one day he couldn't protect her. A monster killed her right before his eyes. After that, he hated this world and began to wander alone, lost and without purpose. That's when Ayaka saved him, and thanks to her, he found meaning again. Now he wants to protect her, just like he once tried to protect his daughter. Hearing this, Akira admitted that he was also ready to stay by her side until the very end, but his words were cut short by a scream. He instantly leaped over the fence and rushed towards the girls, thinking a monster had attacked them, but it turned out to be just Ayaka playing with Nao. Ayaka indignantly yelled, accusing Akira of peeping. Later, once everything had calmed down, Akira asked how much further they had to go. Ayaka replied that they were close. Akira urged everyone to gather themselves and keep moving. Akira surveyed the surroundings and noted that, apparently, the destruction in these parts wasn't as extensive as in other zones. However, he couldn't pinpoint where monsters might be hiding, so he advised everyone to move cautiously. But before he could finish speaking, he noticed Ayaka suddenly bolt forward, shouting that her father must be around that corner, because that's where her house was. When she reached her destination, she was met with a terrible sight. Her childhood home was completely destroyed, reduced to a pile of rubble. Ayaka couldn't believe what she was seeing. She stood there stunned, calling out for her father in a trembling voice, hoping he would answer. She called for him again and again, but there was no response. Soon her gaze fell upon motionless bodies. Akira arrived right after her and anxiously spoke her name. Ayaka, breaking down, confessed that deep down she had long suspected this outcome. She didn't know if her father was alive or not, and she had tried to prepare herself for the worst-case scenario. She had told herself that she would be able to accept any truth, but now, facing reality, she realized she couldn't bring herself to believe that her father was truly dead. Tears began to well up in her eyes, and she tried her best to hold them back. Meanwhile, Akira noticed an inky darkness beginning to manifest nearby, thickening in the air. He immediately yelled at Ayaka to run. A sinister enemy appeared right in front of her. The system automatically activated a skill. Sprint was used, with 60 seconds remaining. Akira, without hesitation, rushed to save Ayaka. A cloud of dust rose beneath his feet, swirling into a vortex. Now, noticing what was happening, cried out, calling for Akira and Ayaka. Despite the danger, Akira managed to grab Ayaka in time and pull her to safety. He turned to Ayaka and checked on her condition. Still in shock, she barely whispered, recognizing him. Despair about her father once again crept into her voice. Akira wasted no time, immediately ordering Alan to take Ayaka far away from the battlefield. He told Nao to find cover and start accumulating magical power. Nao agreed without objection. Alan also responded affirmatively and began to act. Akira at that moment was deep in thought. He realized the situation was strange. Up until now, all bosses, even after his resurrections, had remained in their original locations. But this enemy, it appeared here as if it knew exactly where to find them. Akira began to suspect that the monster was deliberately tracking their movements. Perhaps it really was pursuing them. However, now was not the time for deep contemplation. The system displayed the details of the current C-Class quest, attacking Dullahan. The completion condition was to defeat the boss itself. Filled with determination, Akira entered the fray. He, not hiding his fury, accused the enemy of daring to stand in their team's way. He launched his attack, and the battle with Dullahan entered its active phase. Meanwhile, Ayaka, hidden away, recalled that there were hoof prints near the spot where she had found the traces. She realized that, most likely, this very monster was involved in her father's fate. Nao observed the unfolding events, confirming that this was indeed the Dullahan Akira had warned them about. In her thoughts, she hoped she could remain unnoticed and aim at the right moment. While Akira distracted the enemy, she accumulated magical power to deliver a strike. But suddenly, Akira realized that the enemy seemed to have stopped pursuing them. Something in its behavior had changed. Nao was just about to unleash her spell when the enemy suddenly appeared right in front of her. Akira immediately shouted her name and rushed to her aid. The enemy attacked, but Akira arrived just in time, shielding Nao with his body. He asked if she was all right. Nao, having sustained an injury, struggled to reply that she was more or less holding on. She was surprised by how the enemy had managed to find her, as she had hidden herself to remain out of its sight. Akira mentally confirmed his fears. The enemy truly had precise knowledge of their whereabouts, regardless of whether they were hidden or not. This was something strange, and he couldn't explain the nature of such an ability. Everything happening seemed frightening and inexplicable. Dullahan activated destructive magic, conjuring a colossal sphere, shimmering with darkness and pulsating with dread. Akira instantly recognized this manifestation as a deadly skill known as Chaos Eater, and immediately realized that dodging or escaping it would be impossible. He wanted to warn Nao but understood that, given the situation, even that would be useless. At the crucial moment, Ayaka activated her Sacred Shield skill, erecting a barrier of light in front of her allies which served as their salvation. Akira noted this act with astonishment and understood how serious she was. Ayaka, standing before him, explained that she had found hoof prints near her father's remains, and her mind was filled with the certainty that this very enemy, Dullahan, was responsible for his death. She declared that she couldn't stand by and was obligated to participate in the fight. Akira was stunned by her resolve. Alan, seeing the team's unity, also volunteered to help in any way he could. Akira agreed, declaring that they would only defeat the enemy together. The system registered the use of the sprint skill, with 60 seconds remaining on its duration. Dullahan once again summoned a giant sphere of magical energy. Nao didn't hesitate, using a double impact arrow to disrupt the enemy's rhythm. Akira, filled with determination, charged into battle. He activated Titanic Strength, which was also registered by the system with a similar 60-second duration. Concentrating all his power, Akira delivered a mighty blow, striking down the horse the enemy was riding. He thought to himself that now that the mount was destroyed, only Dullahan himself remained. But the foe had no intention of retreating. He caught Akira and delivered a crushing blow, making him realize the full power of his opponent. Nao was already preparing to fire another arrow, but she didn't get the chance. Dullahan teleported to her and struck. Ayaka came to the rescue at the right moment, creating a protective barrier and giving Nao a chance to counterattack. Nao didn't miss her opportunity and fired another impact arrow, hitting the enemy. Ayaka, watching the creature recoil from the damage, thought that perhaps they had finally defeated the enemy. Akira also wondered if victory had truly arrived. Alan stepped forward and praised everyone for their outstanding achievement, saying that their success after the battle with the werewolf and this fight was simply astonishing. He congratulated them with admiration on another victory. Ayaka immediately pointed out that Alan had once again avoided the fight. Alan explained that his body was no longer fit for battles and expressed regret that he couldn't fight on equal terms. Ayaka looked at him with disbelief, noting that it was completely unnoticeable outwardly. Akira at that moment was thinking that despite many remaining questions, the most important thing now was that the battle had ended in victory, and at least temporarily everything was settled. Nao approached Alan and asked if he was injured, even though she herself could barely stand. Alan, noticing this, asked about her condition with concern. Nao apologized, feeling exhaustion completely overtake her body. Alan assured her that it was fine, as fatigue was a natural phenomenon after such a battle. He expressed gratitude that she and the others had fought selflessly to save Ayaka. However, in the next second, Alan changed drastically. He suddenly attacked Nao and delivered a fatal blow. Nao died on the spot. Ayaka screamed in horror, shocked by this betrayal. She demanded an explanation, unable to understand how he could do such a thing. Alan coldly stated that he simply got rid of her and saw nothing special in it. He added that the moment of killing a person brought him the greatest pleasure, as he reveled in the victim's pain and helplessness.